Chapter 1882. Grilling big fish was a technical job. Luckily, Meg's skills had always been very good. This was the consensus of the ladies. The big fish, which was more than 5 meters long, was placed on the big grill. Below it was grilled with charcoal made from fruit trees. The skin of the fish sizzled, and soon, an aroma started to waft out. The fish was as thick as a cow. It would take a long time just to grill it. If there was such a big oven, Meg also wanted to stuff it into the oven and wait for the delicacy to cook. There was no oven, but there was Amy. Meg built a simple oven with iron sheets, and kept the bottom of the oven grilling with charcoal. Then he got Amy to cast a few fireballs to grill the iron sheet from all directions. This ensured that the temperature of the grilled fish was balanced so that it could be heated evenly. The whole process lasted for about half an hour. They brushed the oil a few times in the middle. Meg got Amy to keep the fireballs, and then opened the lid of the oven. A big golden grilled fish came into view, and the rich aroma of grilled fish wafted out. Meg grabbed a big handful of cumin powder and scattered it in the air. It landed evenly on the grilled fish, and with the sizzling sound of the oil, the aroma increased by a few notches. Gulp. The three fellows who had been squatting at the side for a long time already couldn't help but start to salivate. Ugly Duckling reached out a small paw towards the fish's tail, but it was immediately pressed back by Amy. Don't be anxious. The fish's tail is mine. Meow meow? Ugly Duckling turned to look at Amy, seemingly unable to accept this fact. Is it done grilling? Irina came back with a big fruit platter. All kinds of fruits were piled up on the fruit platter. There were mangoes, watermelons, and other fruits that Meg couldn't name, but looked juicy. Yes, it's ready to eat. Meg nodded with a smile. Z and Ugly Duckling prepared a sumptuous lunch for us today. Howl. Z raised its head proudly and looked at Meg as if it was asking for a reward. Meow meow, Ugly Duckling also called out. It stretched out a little paw and pointed at the fish tail again, showing its last bit of stubbornness. Come on, I'll give you the head and tail first. Meg took the fat head fish and raised the knife in his hand. A huge grilled fish head fell down with a large piece of fish meat. It was gently patted by the blade and flew into the sky. Z, who had been waiting for a long time, immediately flew up and bit the fish head. Then, it landed on a big tree and began to chew on the fish head slowly. After that, Meg sliced off a fin and tossed it to Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling leaped up and caught the fin that was almost as big as itself in its mouth. It jumped onto a clean rock at the side in a few steps and started chewing. The crispy fin made crunching sounds as it chewed, and its tail wagged happily. Next, it's our turn. Meg took a plate, cut off a few pieces of grilled fish near the head, and passed them to Amy and the rest. They set up a small table under the shade of the tree and enjoyed the refreshing breeze from the lake. They breathed in the fruity fragrance in the air. Each of them had a plate of grilled fish, and there was even a big fruit platter in the middle. Meg and Irina opened a bottle of red wine, while Amy and drank freshly squeezed fruit juice. Meg raised his wine glass with a smile and said, "Let's celebrate our student Amy becoming the champion of the Magic Conference. Congratulations, student Irina. You've broken a series of records that I left behind back then. A daughter inheriting her mother's legacy and suppressing the Magus Tower." A small green grasshopper made of woven reeds appeared in Anne's hand, and she passed it to Amy with a smile. "It's so cute. Thank you, big sister." And Amy's eyes lit up as she received the grasshopper. Then she raised her glass of fruit juice. Cheers. They clinked their glasses lightly, and everyone took a sip of wine and fruit juice before starting to tackle the grilled fish in front of them. The flesh of the fish was extraordinarily plump and tender, and the scaleless skin had been grilled to a golden brown. When the skin was sliced open with a knife, one could feel the crispness, and the flesh beneath the skin was extraordinarily tender. Meg used a fork to pick up a piece of fish with the skin and put it into his mouth. The tender flesh melted almost immediately in his mouth, and the crispy skin became more and more fragrant as he chewed. The spices gave it a wonderful taste, and it gradually filled his mouth as he chewed. Even though it was a freshwater fish, and it was so huge, the flesh of the fish didn't have any fishy smell, nor did it appear to be overripe. This was a little different from the way grilled fish was cooked in restaurants, but even without the addition of gravy, it still had its own unique grilled flavor. A piece of grilled fish quickly entered his stomach, and now he also had a piece of iced watermelon. He felt like his life was complete. Amy quickly finished the grilled fish on her plate, and she looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. "The grilled fish is so delicious, Father, I want more." Meow, Howl, Ugly Duckling and Azzy came to the grill again, and looked at him eagerly. "Come on." Meg cut the fish for them again with a smile. The four of them couldn't eat much of the 5-meter-long fish, and most of it went into Azzy's and Ugly Duckling's stomachs. Meow, Ugly Duckling, whose stomach was round from eating, lay on its back on the large limestone, and licked its lips with satisfaction. This was the first time it had experienced the feeling of having a full stomach. It was indeed so blissful. Azzy was still gnawing on the fish bones at the side. This was a big fish to everyone, but to it wasn't enough to fill its stomach. However, the taste of this grilled fish was much more delicious than raw fish. Even the bones were very tasty. Meg and his family had already started eating. The iced freshly squeezed fruit juice and freshly picked fruits were very comfortable in the cool breeze. Amy took a bite of the iced watermelon and happily said, "So blissful," burp, and also had a faint smile on her face as she held her fruit juice. Meg looked at the sparkling surface of the lake, and then turned to look at Irina, Amy, and beside him. With his wife by his side and his daughters by his side, he was spending his days leisurely. This kind of carefree life was indeed intoxicating. Meg took a look at Irina, and then looked at Amy with a serious expression, and said, "Amy, Father and your mother have something to tell you today." Irina also looked at Amy with a smile on her face. "Huh." Amy sat up slightly, and looked at the two of them with confusion. She guessed, "Could it be that I'm going to be a big sister?" Meg and Irina were both speechless. They didn't expect the little one to think of a second child. Meg shook his head with a smile, and said, "You're not going to be a big sister. It's something about me and your mother. It's also something you used to ask me often." Amy blinked and listened carefully. "I am Meg Alex, the #1 knight on the Norland continent. She is Princess Irina of the Wind Forest, and you are our daughter, Amy Alex." Meg said seriously. Chapter 1883. Amy's mouth was slightly agape. After a while, she said in shock, "Then, I'm the legendary second generation?" Second generation was the abbreviation for the descendants of the strong in this world. In recent years, after world peace, this title had gradually gained popularity and recognition. Even a 3-year-old like Amy knew about it. "Yes." Meg nodded and looked at Amy with a worried gaze. Amy blinked and suddenly realized something very important. She looked at Irina with reddened eyes. "So, big sister Irina, you really are my mother." "Yes, I'm sorry, Irina. I didn't tell you about this immediately." Irina nodded slightly and said apologetically. A tear fell from the corner of Amy's eye, but she quickly wiped it away. She shook her head and said, "It's okay. I'm just too happy. I have a mother too. I'm not a child without a mother. From now on, Mother will never leave you again." Irina gently hugged Amy in her arms and pursed her lips. Her eyes were also a little red. Amy nodded and hugged Irina tightly. Meg sighed in his heart. This child was so sensible that it made his heart ache. If it weren't for the fact that they were enemies of the world, how could he bear to let her suffer such grievances? Now that he had fully recovered and even improved his strength, Irina had no more worries. It was also time to tell Amy about this. This was the decision he had made after discussing it with Irina yesterday. They were going to tell Amy everything. After a long while, Amy gradually calmed down. She raised her head from Irina's arms and stared at Irina's face for quite a while before touching her face gently. "So, the one I saw in my dreams was really Mother. I remember how you looked in my dreams. You look exactly the same." Irina nodded her head and said, "You look exactly the same. From now on, you can see me every day when you wake up. You don't have to look for me in your dreams." Irina patted her head and said with a smile, "As if." Amy nodded vigorously, a bright smile spreading across her face. But father and mother are so powerful, why would they be separated? I heard from the customers that Alex is a dragon slayer and the most powerful knight on the Norland continent. All the bad guys are afraid of him. After a short while, Amy turned to the two of them with a perplexed expression. Meg thought for a moment, then looked at Amy and explained, although we were all very strong back then, after you were born, we suffered serious injuries because of some bad guys. I hid my identity and brought you to Chaos City, while your mother was trapped in the Wind Forest. She hadn't recovered from her injuries, so she couldn't fight against those bad guys, so we couldn't meet. Who are the bad guys who bullied you? I'm going to blast them into the sky with a fireball. Amy said angrily. Most of them are already dead. Father can deal with the rest. Amy, you just have to be happy every day. Meg shook his head with a smile. I'm much stronger than before. Those bad guys are no match for me. I knew father was the most powerful since a long time ago. Amy nodded, and looked at Meg with admiration in her eyes. I'm super powerful too. Irina coughed softly, and said seriously. Amy looked at the two of them, and expectantly asked, then, can I tell the others that my father is the dragon slayer Alex, and my mother is the elven princess? She wanted to announce to the world that she had a mother too, and that she was the most beautiful and powerful mother in the world. We also want to let Amy choose for herself. Meg looked at Amy. We still have some enemies who are more difficult to deal with now. They are everywhere. If we go public with our relationship, we might have to leave Chaos City and Amy's temporarily for your safety. We can only come back after we've dealt with those hidden dangers. Leave? Amy was shocked. Then we're going to be separated from Big Sister Mia and the rest, and Daphne and the rest? Yes. If we continue to stay by their side, we'll bring danger to them instead. Meg nodded. The reason why Andre and the other powerhouses were wary of him now was not only because he had broken through the 10th tier shackles and stepped into the demigod realm, but also because he looked like he had nothing to worry about. Nobody knew where he was now, and they couldn't find any weakness in him. He could appear beside your bed, and it was like an unsheathed sword hanging over your head. That was the most terrifying thing. Even someone as strong as Alex was destined not to be able to step out of that long street when he carried Amy on his back that rainy night. His enemies were still very strong, even stronger than before. But as long as they couldn't find him, they would always be the ones in a passive position. He told Amy everything because he wanted her to know that her biological mother was Irina, and that she was already by her side. As for whether to reveal everything to the world, he respected Amy's choice. Amy pondered seriously for a while before asking Meg, if I don't say anything, will Mother continue to stay by our side? Can the restaurant continue to operate? The ladies can also stay and continue working, right? Can I continue to attend classes at Chaos School and learn magic from Master? Meg nodded. Then, nothing will change. At least, that's the case for now. Then it's fine as long as I know. I have Mother, so this is the most important thing to me. It's not important to others. A smile bloomed on Amy's face. I like Mother, and I also like my friends and my current life. All right, we respect your choice. Meg nodded with a smile. Don't worry. It won't be long before I can officially become the lady boss of Amy's and become your mother, Irina said with a smile as she pinched Amy's cheeks. Mother, are you going to reveal everything yourself? Amy blinked at her. Oh. Since you can all change your identities, why can't I also change my identity and enter your lives? Irina looked at Meg with a smile. As long as someone takes the initiative, he might be able to pursue me again, right? Did you hear that, Father? You have to do your best. Amy looked back at Meg and clenched her little fists as she encouraged him. As a mature man who has established the image of a cold and aloof store manager, I'm usually in charge of gaining the admiration of young ladies. If I suddenly take the initiative with a beautiful young lady, it's easy to ruin my image, Meg said calmly. Chapter 1884. Amy's eyes widened. Irina's eyes narrowed slightly, and a dangerous light flashed in them. Meg's eyelids twitched a few times, and he suddenly panicked. Of course, he wouldn't reject such a romantic thing to fall in love again. However, this involved the problem of who should pursue who first. Of course, the confession that night. He was the one who took the initiative, so he was already in a passive position. But now, in front of Amy and Anne, he needed to be a little more dignified as the head of the family. At least, he couldn't act like a bootlicker. Meg, who felt a chill on his neck, quickly smiled and said, "But it's not impossible for the story of the cold and aloof store manager to fall in love with a pure and beautiful girl at first sight, right?" "So, who's the pure and beautiful girl you're talking about?" Irina had already taken out a folding chair from somewhere and asked with a smile. "Could it be that beautiful orc lady who came to eat a few days ago?" Amy asked tentatively. "Yes, that's the one," Meg quickly answered. He was grateful for Amy's godly help. Otherwise, he didn't know if he could really take the chair. Meg looked at Irina with a smile. "I think we still have a chance." "Really? I'm not so sure now." Irina didn't deny it. "It's okay, Mother. I'll help you keep an eye on Father. I won't let the other ladies have a chance," Amy said righteously, and didn't forget to turn around and wink at Meg. Meg knew that the little girl probably didn't know that the beautiful orc lady was Irina in disguise, so he could only nod along. And watched with a smile the whole time, and one hand gently scratched Ugly Duckling's stomach. Meg tied a hammock under the shade of a tree with a gentle breeze, and the sun was shining brightly. Taking advantage of the lunch break, Meg grilled a big fish for Ozzy, who was still hungry. Ozzy, who hadn't had a good meal for a long time, enjoyed the meal to her heart's content. "Are we just going to spend the day on this island?" Amy took a short nap. When she woke up, she ran to Meg, who was fishing by the lake, and asked, "Your mother will decide what to do next," Meg said as he unhooked the fish and threw it back into the lake casually as he packed up his fishing gear. Irina stretched her waist and stretched her body. She smiled and said, "Let's go. I'll take you to an interesting place." "Where is this place?" Amy ran forward, full of curiosity. "A mysterious cave." Irina held Anne's hand and gently landed on Z's back. "I like caves." Amy jumped up as well, and when she turned around, she accidentally kicked Ugly Duckling, which had just jumped into the air. "Meow meow?" Ugly Duckling, which had rolled 2 rounds in the sand, looked up with a puzzled expression. After putting away the fishing gear, Meg picked Ugly Duckling up, shook the sand off its face, and said with a smile, "Don't you know how to fly?" Ugly Duckling tried its best to shake its shoulders, but it didn't fly up. It immediately gave up and chose to let Meg carry it. "Let's go, Ozzy. Fly southwest and land about 250 kilometers away," Irina instructed Ozzy. "Howl." Ozzy, who had eaten its fill, let out a dragon's roar full of energy and flew southwest. In the distance, islands floating in the sky had already appeared in their line of sight. The Sky Island was also known as the Dragon Island. It was said that giant dragons were born on the Sky Island, so it was also regarded as a holy land by the giant dragons. From time to time, they could see a giant dragon flying across the sky like a small black dot. Z hid its aura and glided close to the ground, trying not to attract the giant dragon's attention. "This is a forest, that is a river, and the mountains are continuous. Behind the mountains could be a mountain or it could be the sea." Meg explained some basic natural scenery to Anne with a smile. Everything was very new to Anne. It was a scenery that she couldn't see in Chaos City. After flying for a short while, Z landed in a narrow river valley. The cliffs on both sides were steep, and the rapid river water slapped against the rock walls, creating countless splashes. The closer they got to the river, the narrower the cliffs on both sides became. Z had already slowed down and was hovering at a height of about 100 meters. Further ahead, the valley narrowed rapidly and finally connected to one side of the cliff, leaving only a dark cave that was a few meters tall. The turbulent river water roared and rushed into the cave, disappearing without a trace. "Father, what are we doing here?" Amy looked at that dark cave and asked perplexedly. "That cave is our next destination," Meg said with a smile. Mag smiled as he purchased a sturdy kayak and a set of parachutes from the system. "Let's go. Amy, you fly by yourself. I'll bring Anne and your mother down." Meg kicked the kayak down, and then hugged Anne and Irina. He solemnly said, parachutist 1 ready?" Then he leaped forward. Parachuting was one of Meg's few interests in the past. Now, his control was unparalleled. Hence, he controlled the parachute and landed accurately on the kayak that was drifting with the current. "Perfect landing!" Meg exclaimed excitedly as he opened the parachute and let it drift with the wind. Amy flew to the side of the kayak and stepped on Ugly Duckling's back with one foot and praised, "Father is so awesome." He jumped down from the sky with just a piece of cloth and also looked at Meg with admiration. Meg's best smile was slightly cocky. That was the effect he wanted. Although we flew down in a strange way, even if we jumped down directly, it would still be the same, right? Irina frowned. Meg shook his head. "It looks the same, but it's actually very different. According to the law of free fall, with our weight and density, if we fall from a height of over 100 meters in a parabola, even if we hit the kayak accurately, we would still pierce through it. We wouldn't land on the kayak gracefully." "What law?" Irina frowned as she looked at Meg for a while. Then she took him on Ozzy's back and teleported him back and forth to the kayak 3 times. "Look, there's no such thing as piercing through the kayak." Irina shrugged. "It's okay. I'll get someone to hold down Galileo's coffin." Meg nodded with a complicated expression. "No need. If he's not convinced, just tell him to come and find me," Irina said frankly. "He should be the one who's afraid." The rushing water pushed the kayak forward quickly. The feeling of rocking on top of the waves made them feel very insecure. "All right, children, take your seats first. The children will sit in the front, and we'll sit in the back. No matter what you see in the cave later, don't leave your seats or untie the safety rope. That's the only way to ensure your own safety." Meg buckled the 2 children in the front and fixed Ugly Duckling in between them. He and Irina sat behind them. Chapter 1885. The kayak followed the current and headed toward the cave. It entered through the mouth of the cave, and it was extremely narrow at first. Darkness fell instantly, and the light that shone in from the mouth of the cave quickly disappeared. It was pitch black all around, and water splashed onto them from time to time. The kayak rushed forward at an extremely fast speed in the pitch-black cave, colliding with the cliff and changing directions from time to time. It was silent all around, and only the sound of the water colliding with the kayak and the shore could be heard. It was inevitable that they would feel a tinge of fear. After the kayak moved forward for a while, the current gradually calmed down, and the sound of the water became softer. The kayak also slowed down. Meanwhile, on the surface of the water in the distance, there were suddenly dots of light floating. "Look, it's the stars!" Amy suddenly exclaimed as she pointed up. Everyone looked up, and their eyes lit up. The dots of fluorescent light made them feel as if they were under a starry sky. The further they went, the denser the fluorescent light, which contrasted well with the fluorescent light reflected on the surface of the water. The beautiful scenery at this moment made them feel that the darkness they went through before was worth it. It was also because of that silent and dark journey that they felt so happy when they saw the dots of fluorescent light. "It's so beautiful!" Amy was a little stunned. Anne's face was also full of surprise. She raised her hand, and a firefly landed in her palm. The flickering light made her smile even brighter. Ugly Duckling reached out its paw and carefully fiddled with the firefly that was flying slowly in front of it. Meg looked at the cave that was almost illuminated by fluorescent light. The hanging stalactites were covered in a layer of pale yellow light. The dreamy scene made him marvel at the wonders of nature. Who would have thought that after such a turbulent torrent rushed into the cave, it would become gentle? What was even more unexpected was that such a beautiful scene was hidden in this pitch-black cave. After a moment of hesitation, he took out a photo stone and recorded this beautiful scene. It was a precious material for a DVD. The fireflies also discovered the kayak. They weren't scared away, but instead gathered around it as if there was a firefly light outside the kayak. With the help of the fireflies, he could see the smooth and damp cliffs on both sides. The water gently brushed against the cliffs, making the cliffs even smoother. "There are 2 roads ahead. Which one should we take?" Amy asked as she pointed at the fork in the road ahead. The winding waterway suddenly split into 2, the one on the left being slightly smaller. What was even more amazing was that the fireflies continued to move forward along the waterway on the right, but the waterway on the left was pitch black. There was not even a single firefly. Why is there another road? Irina was surprised. The kayak stopped at the fork in the road. You didn't before? Meg asked. The last time I was here, there wasn't this waterway on the left. Irina shook her head and frowned as she looked at the dark waterway on the left. At this moment, Anne, who had been quietly playing with the fireflies, suddenly struggled to get up. She pointed at the waterway on the left with an anxious and scared look on her face. Meg and Irina quickly noticed the change in Anne. Their hearts sank and their faces showed signs of vigilance. Anne, what's wrong? Did you sense something? Irina held Anne's hand and asked her. Anne calmed down a little and began to gesture with her hand. She said there's something scary in this cave that makes her feel scared. Meg translated and his face became more serious. Irina pursed her lips, looked at Anne and asked, Is it the devil? And thought for a while and nodded. Meg and Irina looked at each other and saw a trace of uneasiness in each other's eyes. Anne could be said to be a part of the Great Old Ones or a different kind of Great Old Ones. Her sense of the Great Old Ones was convincing. Go right, Meg said without hesitation. Okay. Irina nodded, and the kayak turned to the waterway on the right and continued to move forward, away from the waterway. Father, is there a devil hiding in that tunnel? Why don't we get rid of the devil? Amy asked curiously, and she was eager to try. That's a very dangerous devil. Even your mother and I aren't confident that we can get rid of it, let alone guarantee your and Anne's safety. Meg shook his head. Amy tilted her head and thought for a while. Then, let's wait until I grow up and become stronger before we get rid of it. Okay, wait until Amy grows up, then we can deal with such a powerful devil, Meg said with a smile. The kayak continued to move forward. Along the way, there were still specks of light and stars, but no one was in the mood to appreciate it. After drifting forward for another 10-odd minutes, the fireflies slowly disappeared, and a light spot appeared in the distance, and it was getting bigger and bigger in their vision. The kayak rushed out of the cave with the current, and the sunlight shone down, making them close their eyes subconsciously. The river was no longer turbulent, and the wide and flat channel extended into the distance. Howl, Ozzy swooped down and flew close to the surface of the water to accompany the kayak. Ozzy, take Amy and Anne for a walk. Come back here to pick us up in an hour. Meg unbuckled Amy and Anne's seatbelts and let them get on the griffin's back before instructing Ozzy. Father, aren't you leaving? Amy asked Meg as she hugged Ugly Duckling. Yes, we're going back to take a look. We'll be back in a while, Meg said with a smile and gave Ozzy a look. Ozzy flapped its wings and left with Amy and Anne. Could it be the remaining half of that octopus monster's body? Irina asked as she looked at Meg, who had taken out the Tiandu sword. Meg lifted his head and looked at the giant islands floating in the sky. It should be Golden Dragon Island if we go up from here. Lewis and the rest found the same mural under Golden Dragon Island, but they didn't find the sealed Great Old One. Therefore, it's possible that it's sealed under Dragon Island. Who cares what it is? We'll know once we check it out. Irina waved her hand, and the kayak turned around and started to go against the current, returning to the fork in the water channel. Let's go and see what's hidden here. Even the fireflies are afraid of it. Meg placed a huge searchlight on the bow of the boat to illuminate the front. Irina controlled the kayak to enter the water channel on the left and slowly moved forward with the current. The cave in this water channel was 5 meters wide and tens of meters tall. There were no stalactites at the top, and it was abnormally smooth as if it had been excavated and polished. Meg and Irina didn't make a sound as they looked around warily. The kayak moved forward quietly for over 10 minutes. After turning around a large bay, a huge stone door that was 100 meters tall appeared in their vision. Chapter 1886. The familiar giant door was still engraved with terrifying murals. However, this stone door was already damaged. There was a huge hole in the middle, and the gap was in a mess as if it had been smashed. The kayak stopped in front of the stone door slowly. Meg and Irina both had grave expressions. Seems like we're too late. That thing has already broken free from the seal and left this place, Meg said with a frown as he held the Tian-Du sword. It's the same aura as that fellow outside Chaos City. It's indeed not here anymore. Irina also had a grave expression. That great old one in Chaos City had at least given them some time, but this one had already broken free from the seal and disappeared. The fear of the unknown was the most troublesome. Let's go in and take a look. The kayak went through the broken stone door and entered an extremely wide cave. The searchlight circled around, and they could see the cracked cliff walls. It seemed like a terrifying battle had happened here before, and they could also see some ancient runes left behind. Looking at the marks left behind on the cliff walls, Meg smelled something unusual. The searchlight shone into the water, and through the clear water, they could see the broken seal spell formation and the broken chains below. Suddenly, the searchlight's light reflected back at the bottom of the water. Irina grabbed at the air, and a palm-sized silver dragon scale flew out from the bottom of the water and landed in her hand. It's a frost dragon scale? Irina stared at that dragon scale for a while. The aura isn't too old. It should have fallen here in recent years. But Douglas said that the frost dragon didn't know anything about this. Why would this frost dragon scale appear here? And from the marks left behind on the cliff, there should be a frost dragon that had a battle with that great old one here, and its power shouldn't be below the 10th tier. Meg frowned. The two of them looked at each other, and said almost at the same time, Rankst. The Frost Dragon tribe was a powerful tribe among the giant dragons. Apart from Douglas, who was a top-notch powerhouse, there was actually another powerhouse whose name shook the entire Norland continent, Rankst. Rankster's experience could be said to be legendary. He started as an illegitimate child despised by the Golden Dragons and the Frost Dragons. Then he fought his way up to the Frost Throne. At that time, Alex was in the limelight and had never tasted defeat, but he did not win every battle. In Meg's memory, the battle with Rankster was one of the most difficult battles that Alex had ever faced. In the end, there was no clear winner between the two of them. Instead, there was some sympathy between the two of them. Therefore, in terms of actual combat ability, Rankster should be above Douglas. If there was any frost dragon in this world that could fight against the great old ones, Meg could only think of Rankster. Also, Rankster was Elizabeth's father. He had suddenly disappeared 3 years ago. If he had come here 3 years ago and fought with the great old ones, that timeline was completely consistent. There are no giant dragon bones here, only a dragon scale. Then, where did he go? Irina frowned. This requires a large-scale family search program. Where did Daddy go? To solve the mystery. Meg was also frowning. Since the great old ones here could break the seal, they were not weak. No matter how strong Rankster was, he couldn't have defeated him with just one dragon. Moreover, defeating a great old ones was such a flashy thing. There was no reason for him to hide for 3 years and not even contact his own daughter. Irina looked around the cave and speculated, judging from the hole in the door, the possibility of the great old ones winning the battle is higher. As for Lantist, he either died and was swallowed, or he became the great old one's slave. The possibility of him escaping is not high. No matter what the outcome is, this is not a good thing for the Norland continent. A great old one that has broken free from the seal is no different from an unsheathed sword hanging over everyone's head. Meg pondered for a while before looking at Irina and saying, I think we should inform all the races about this. If there are other great old ones sealed on the Norland continent, once they are released, I'm afraid it will lead to a disaster that you and I can't stop. Also, we should be more vigilant against the other half of the great old one outside Chaos City. Just the octopus head is already so difficult to deal with. If they combine, I'm afraid we won't be able to do anything to it. Irina nodded. Meg thought that the octopus monster had already become a high-quality ingredient in the kitchens of the housewives in Chaos City. It was already a far cry from the great old one in terms of style. However, he still nodded. Once Cthulhu combined, he really didn't have much confidence in stopping it outside the seal. Meg said, I'm afraid it's a little too late to mention this at the peace conference 3 days later. After we go back today, let's go see Michael, and get him to inform the powerhouses of the various races so that they can send their representatives over to investigate this place. We can also discuss countermeasures at the peace conference 3 days later. All right. Irina nodded. She took out a photo stone and threw out a few light balls to record the situation in the cave. After that, she got into the kayak with Meg and prepared to leave. Wait a minute. Meg suddenly shouted when the boat reached the stone door. He rowed the boat close to the cliff, grabbed the searchlight, and shone it on the wall. He found a deep groove. After hesitating for a while, he used the Tian-Du sword to slash it twice. A few stones fell, and a silver token nailed to the stone wall was revealed. Meg reached out to take the token. The half-foot-long token was made of mystic ice iron. A layer of frost formed when he touched it. A lifelike frost dragon was carved on the surface of the token. On the other side, there were 3 big words, Frost Token. It's really him. Meg sighed softly. This was the Frost Dragon Chief's identity token. It belonged to Rangst. Such an important item was nailed to the stone wall. Its owner most likely wanted to keep it. Maybe I should give this token to his daughter, Meg said softly as he kept the Frost Token. Irina was silent. She steered the kayak against the current and out of the cave. After the kayak left the cave, the warm sunlight shone down again, chasing away some of the haze in their hearts. Meg looked at Irina, who was standing valiantly at the bow of the boat, and forced a smile. I'm sorry. I seem to have chosen a bad place for a holiday. I was the one who chose the Firefly Cave. The children like it. I like it too. Irina turned to look at Meg and smiled. Don't even think about snatching this credit. No pop-up window. Chapter 1887. At this moment, looking at Irina's pure smile, Meg only felt that the haze in his heart had dissipated, and a thick warmth rose in his heart. Irina saw that Meg was a little dazed as he looked at her, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. However, she said coquettishly, someone said that he would wait for others to take the initiative. Don't fall for me so easily. Yeah, I can't even control myself. You can only blame yourself for being too beautiful, Meg said leisurely with a smile on his face. Awu, Az, who had just flown back, let out a surprised cry when it discovered Meg below. It swooped down and landed on the surface of the water, causing ripples to appear on the surface of the water. Father! Seeing that Meg and Irina were fine, Amy breathed a sigh of relief. Then she asked curiously, where are the demons? Have you guys already dealt with them? There didn't seem to be any demons in the cave, so we went around and came back. Meg smiled and shook his head. I see. Amy nodded. She was a little relieved, but also a little disappointed. Let's go. We'll go around the area again. It's time to go home. Meg jumped onto the griffin, put away the kayak, and let Az rise into the air. Az carried everyone to a beautiful valley of flowers. The 2 children carried garlands and embarked on the return journey with satisfaction. This is so fun. I love playing like this. Can we come out to play like this more often in the future? Amy held a bouquet of flowers in her hand and a beautiful garland on her head. She looked at Meg with anticipation. Of course. If you like, we can come out to play as a family on our days off in the future. Meg smiled and nodded. Seeing the smiles on the children's faces, his mood brightened. Father is so nice. Amy jumped up and hugged Meg's neck, kissing him on the cheek. I was the one who suggested coming here today, Irina said indifferently. She looked straight ahead as if she had just said it casually. Amy also kissed Irina on the cheek and said with a smile, Mother is also very good. Irina just answered casually, but the smile in the corner of her eyes could not be hidden. And skillfully weaved 2 garlands and put them on Meg and Irina's heads. Irina took out a bronze mirror and looked at it carefully for a while before turning back to look at Anne with a smile. It's really beautiful. I like it very much. Thank you, and smiled and made a heart with her hand. I like it too, and has a pair of skillful hands. Meg also smiled. Although it was a little awkward for a man like him to wear a garland, as long as the children were happy, he did not mind. Az returned, and brought them back to Chaos City very quickly. They stopped at a mountain 15 kilometers away. Amy, you two go back to the restaurant with Mother first. I still have something to do. I have a dinner date with everyone tonight to celebrate your victory, Meg said to Amy and Anne with a smile. Okay, then you must come back early, Amy reminded as she nodded obediently. I'll be back very soon. Meg nodded. Amy and Anne stepped into the teleportation portal that Irina had set up and disappeared from the mountain top in the blink of an eye. Meg looked around, and after making sure that there was no one around, he immediately changed into his equipment and put on his mask. Then he rode on Oz and flew towards Chaos City. When they were close to Chaos City, Meg slowed down and lowered his altitude. According to Chaos City's rules, 10th tier powerhouses were not affected by the flight restrictions. They could fly freely in the city as long as they did not harm the civilians and facilities. That griffin is actually purple. Could that be the legendary purple-striped griffin? Alex's mount. It's him. It's him. It's him. Our hero Alex. As Oz's flying altitude decreased, the dazzling purple lightning tattoo had an unparalleled distinguishing feature. Soon, someone recognized his identity. Exclamations and praises could be heard everywhere. From the west of the city to the south of the city, almost the entire city was in an uproar. Looking at those ladies who were waving their scarves crazily and screaming at the top of their lungs, Meg could not help but sigh. Beautiful women are indeed all liars. Yesterday, they said they wanted to bear my children in front of the stall, and today, they said the same thing to a man flying across the sky. To be honest, Meg did not expect himself to be so popular. Although Alex had made a name for himself as the #1 knight, his dragon-slaying battle record was unparalleled, and the Tian-Du sword did not kill a nobody. His influence was still limited to the Roth Empire. This was Chaos City, an international metropolis where all races lived together. He did not expect to gain so many admirers here. He even had a wicked thought. If he took off his mask now and said, "Learn how to cook from me," he wondered how many fans would change their minds. After seeing the influence of Alex's alias, Meg had a plan to attract fans. He could try it when he had the chance. Hurry up. Go to Aiden Square and stop in front of the ice cream shop. Meg instructed, and Oz's speed suddenly increased. He swept past the roofs and finally stopped in front of the ice cream shop. Many gazes were attracted to this scene. Purple-striped griffin, dragon-slaying warrior, the strongest knight under the stars, the savior of the world, Alex. That man had appeared. The Aiden Square, which was always bustling with people, was instantly bustling. If Alex was only a hero in the hearts of the Roth Empire's citizens in the past, then after the emergency lockdown, Chaos City had already regarded Alex as their savior. There were countless things about him that people admired, so he had become the idol of the entire nation. It's him. Elizabeth, who was making ice cream for Yabamiya, suddenly looked out the window. Through the glass door, she could see the man sitting on the purple-striped griffin's back, the familiar mask, and the Tian-Du sword that was casually slung at the side. Alex. This was the person she used to regard as her #1 enemy. The person she wanted to find like a madman. But now, she could no longer feel any enmity towards him. If it was not for him, she would have died in the hands of Fox and the cannibalistic rules that day. She would not have been able to stay at Mamie's after coming to Chaos City. He was the one who saved her life. Just based on this, she could not say that she wanted to kill him anymore. But why did he come here today? Whoa, what a beautiful griffin. Isn't that big sister Irina's man? Is he here to eat ice cream? Yabamiya took a look, and her eyes lit up immediately. They had fought together with Alex at the Goblin's border, so she was not afraid of him. She only felt that he was a very cool man. Of course, he was very compatible with big sister Irina. Meg pushed the door open and said to Elizabeth, "Elizabeth, I want to talk to you alone." Chapter 1888. All eyes in the shop immediately focused on Elizabeth. It turned out that Alex wasn't here to eat the ice cream, but to find this beautiful lady. Elizabeth was also a little surprised. She looked at Alex, who was standing at the door, and was silent for a while. She handed the ice cream in her hand to Yabamiya and followed him out. I found this token in a cave today. I think I should give it to you. Meg looked at Elizabeth, who was walking out of the door, and took out the frost token. This is... Elizabeth's eyes widened. She took the frost token with trembling hands. As soon as she touched it, she was already sure that it was the real frost token, and it was the one that once belonged to her father. Where did you get her? Elizabeth looked at Meg with reddened eyes, and her voice was trembling. In a cave. There should be more people going there in the next 2 days. If you want to see it for yourself, I can get them to take you there. Meg looked at Elizabeth calmly. He could understand how she felt at the moment. Elizabeth held the frost token tightly and looked at Alex. She didn't know how trustworthy the man in front of her was, but with his strength and status, there was no need for him to lie to her, let alone return the frost token to her personally. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded. I want to go. Someone will inform you. Meg nodded slightly and turned to walk toward the griffin. However, he stopped after a few steps and turned to look at Elizabeth. Your father's disappearance has nothing to do with me. He is a hero. You can choose not to believe me, but I hope you know this. After saying that, Meg landed on the griffin's back again. He then turned into a purple light and disappeared into the sky in the blink of an eye. Elizabeth held the frost token and looked at the sky for a long time. Then, she pursed her lips and returned to the ice cream shop. Who is that beautiful lady? Why did Alex come to find her personally and give her something? If she's Elizabeth, then she's the princess of the Frost Dragons, and Alex seems to have given her the Frost Token? It said that the Frost Token is the token of the Frost Dragon tribe's leader. Could it be that Alex supports her to become the new Frost Queen? People were whispering, and the popularity of Alex's sudden appearance would not die down for a while. Sister, are you all right? Yabamiya looked at Elizabeth, whose eyes were red, and hurriedly went up to her and asked with concern, I'm fine. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. She looked at Yabamiya and said softly, I'm not feeling well. I'm going back to rest. Okay, you can go back first. Yabamiya quickly nodded and helped her take off her apron without asking any more questions. Elizabeth went back to the dormitory, closed the door, and took out the frost token. She gently caressed the frost dragon carving and murmured, Father, where are you exactly? The frost token was the proof of identity of the Frost Dragon tribe's leader. She knew very well how precious this token was to her father. He had risked his life and finally sat on the frost throne just to get this token. But now, Alex had found it in a cave. Countless bad thoughts flooded her mind. If not for the crisis of life and death, she would never believe that her father would abandon the frost token. And once the crisis was over, he would definitely find it again. She didn't dare to continue thinking, hero? She thought of what Alex had said earlier. She didn't want a hero. She only wanted her father. The purple-striped griffin flew over the Aiden Square. Meg glanced at the conspicuous Amy's and seafood stall at the entrance. The huge projection screen was still playing the tutorial of the Octopus Tentacles series. There was no one cooking at the stall, but there was still a large group of people watching the tutorial video seriously. And there was a long queue at the Octopus Tentacles stall. The scale was no less than yesterday's. Seems like video tutorials are still very popular. Meg was deep in thought. He was even more determined to get the magic vision machine out. Aziz turned around and went to the City Lord's castle. The purple-striped griffin landed outside the City Lord's castle, and Dicus came out to welcome it. He looked at Meg and said respectfully, Master Alex, the City Lord is already waiting in the guest hall. Please follow me. Meg replied in a low voice, and followed Dicus into the City Lord's castle. Michael looked at Alex, who came in, and asked with a smile, Alex, why are you looking for me? Meg glanced at the closed door, and then looked at Michael. He went straight to the point, and said, We found the second Great Old One seal, but the seal has been destroyed, and the Great Old One is missing. What? Michael's smile froze instantly, and he took a step forward instinctively. You're saying that a devil has broken free from the seal and come to the world? Yes. Meg took out the photo stone, and played the scene they had recorded for Michael. Looking at the familiar mural on the broken stone door and the broken seal spell formation at the bottom of the water, Michael's expression gradually became serious. Could this be the other half of the devil's body outside Chaos City? Michael asked Meg. From the looks of the mural, the possibility is not small. Meg nodded and continued, but there's nothing left at the scene that's related to the Great Old One. But from the traces in the cave, it seems like there was a very intense battle there. I found a dragon scale and a frost token at the scene. Meg took out the frost dragon scale and passed it to Michael. I've already passed the frost token to Rankster's daughter, Elizabeth. You're saying that Rankster had an intense battle with the devil in that cave? Michael said with a frown as he sized up the dragon scale in his hand. The traces of the battle were left behind by a giant dragon, and this dragon scale and frost token were left at the scene. I can't think of a second dragon apart from him, Meg said calmly. Michael nodded and agreed with Meg's judgment. He said, the devil has broken free from the seal, and this is a huge crisis for the entire Norland continent. I have to inform all the races immediately to raise their vigilance and guard against attacks from the devil. At the same time, I have to increase the defense level of the Thunderstorm Mountains. Meg nodded slightly. This was something that he didn't need to be involved in. However, he still looked at Michael and said, please help me tell Douglas that I was the one who passed the frost token to Elizabeth. Understood. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Meg turned to leave. This is really one problem after another. It's making me bald. Michael scratched his head and let Dicus in to start drafting the notice. Chapter 1889. After Az left the city, Meg casually found a place to parachute before riding his beloved bicycle back to the city. As the sun set, Meg returned to the restaurant and began preparing for the dinner party. The main character of the dinner party was Amy, so other than the people in the restaurant, Meg also invited Daphne, Jessica, Ignatsu, Jeffrey's family, and teacher Luna. Crassus and Julian were naturally invited. As Amy's teachers, the reason why Amy's strength could improve so quickly was naturally because of the two teachers' meticulous guidance. I've already informed Michael. The various races should receive the news soon. However, the Great Old One is in the dark now, and we're in the open. I'm afraid it'll be difficult to form an effective defense, Meg said to Irina, who was leaning against the door frame and eating grapes as he chopped vegetables. The problem is, even if we can find it, can we kill it? Irina asked Meg. If its ability is the same as that octopus monster, we won't be able to kill it, nor will we be able to stop it from leaving. Meg shook his head. Unless we build another sealing array formation, trick it into the sealing array formation, and seal it again. Do you think they're stupid? Any stupid thing can't live for millions of years, let alone a great old one that has already learned how to control people's thoughts. Meg shook his head. In the face of such a powerful and cunning opponent, a sense of helplessness would always arise in one's heart. Then there's no need to worry. We can't find it or defeat it anyway. Why don't we build another sealing array formation beside the seal at the Thunderstorm Mountains and wait for it to come to us before stuffing it in? Irina said calmly as she spat out a grape seed. Meg thought for a while and nodded. That's a good idea. Instead of searching aimlessly like a headless fly, it was better to follow Irina's suggestion and build another sealing array formation at the Thunderstorm Mountains and wait for the Great Old One to walk into the trap. No matter how one analyzed it, the Thunderstorm Mountain range was most likely the target of the Great Old One. I heard from Amy that you invited teacher Luna. Irina fed herself another grape. Meg stole a glance at Irina's expression and suddenly felt a little nervous. Very good. I was just about to thank her, Irina said with a smile. Meg could not see through her thoughts, but he knew that with her intelligence and upbringing, she would definitely not do anything that would make teacher Luna embarrassed and uncomfortable. They're here. I'll go out first. The female lead usually comes last. Irina peeled the last grape and fed it to Meg. Her lips curled into a smile as she turned to leave. Meg chewed, and the juices sputtered in his mouth. It was so sweet. The bell rang outside the door. Amy kicked Ugly Duckling's butt and instructed, Ugly Duckling, go and open the door." Ugly Duckling got up lazily and stretched before making its way to the door. When it reached the door, it jumped up and hugged the doorknob. Its round body swayed a little, and the door swung open. "Ugly Duckling, you're getting better at opening the door." Yabamiya reached out to hug Ugly Duckling, who was still hanging on the doorknob, and rubbed its head with a smile. "Meow." Ugly Duckling closed its eyes comfortably and allowed Yabamiya to ravage it. Phyllis and the rest also followed Mia in. "Big Sister Mia, Big Sister Phyllis, Big Sister Connie." Amy greeted everyone with a smile. "Amy is awesome. You won the championship." Yabamiya gave Amy a thumbs up. "She's already a 7th tier magic caster. She's already a 7th tier magic caster at this age. This world is crazy." Camilla looked at Amy and couldn't help but praise her. The news of Amy winning the championship of the Magic Caster Tournament had already spread across the Norland continent, and it had a huge impact. A 4-year-old high-tier magic caster who defeated an 8th-tier magic caster to win the championship was also a disciple of both Crassus and Julian. She was also proficient in both melee and long-range magic. It could be foreseen that a legendary magic caster was about to step onto the stage of history, and even become the top existence who could change the situation of the continent. In comparison, even Irina seemed to pale in comparison. Thank you, everyone." Amy accepted everyone's congratulations with a smile. After a while, Daphne, Jessica, and the other children also came, and the restaurant became lively instantly. Big Sister, I want a hug." Parber wobbled over with his little hands raised, but Amy avoided him again. However, this time, and picked him up with a smile. Big Sister, Parber looked at Anne with a happy smile on his face. "Miss and is really like an angel," George said to Miranda, who was beside him, with a smile. "But he has indeed become very heavy," Parber said seriously. "For a little girl, it's even more so." Then, he saw Amy pick up a table with one hand, and help to put it aside. "Parber." After a moment of silence, Parber explained awkwardly, "Maybe she doesn't have such a problem." Amy jogged over, and smiled at Chris, who was in Miranda's arms as she asked, "Little Sister Chris, do you want to play with us?" Squeak. Chris looked at Amy, and raised her little hand happily. "But Chris can't walk yet." Miranda was a little hesitant. Parber stood up and said firmly, "It's okay. I will look after her." "What about Angus? Can he play with you?" George pointed at Angus, who was in his arms. Amy and Parber looked at Angus, who was biting his pacifier and staring at them with his big eyes. "I can only carry one." Amy carefully took Chris in her arms. "Angus should stay here quietly. He's too young and too naughty." "I can only take good care of little Sister Chris," Parber said seriously. Angus seemed to have felt the evil of this world. The pacifier in his mouth suddenly lost its taste, and he raised his head and cried. "Leave it to me. I will play with the children. Don't worry." Gina went up with a smile, and took the child from George's arms. Then, she followed the children upstairs. Miss Gina is such a gentle person. No matter which child is in her arms, they will stop crying immediately. Miranda looked at Angus, who was laughing happily because of Gina, with envy. If she were the one comforting him, he might not even be able to have a peaceful dinner tonight. "Yes, Mamie Restaurant is the only place where I can have a peaceful meal." George nodded in agreement. It was too difficult to take care of 3 children, even with the help of the auntie. No pop-up window. Chapter 1890. Alex found the frost token, but he didn't find Rankst. Moreover, this matter is related to the devil, so I'm afraid he has already met with misfortune. Douglas waved the letter in his hand, and looked at the elders and powerhouses of the Frost Dragon tribe with a frown. The expressions of all the dragons changed when they heard that. Although Rankster didn't have many true supporters in the Frost Dragon tribe, he was still the most powerful of the Frost Dragon tribe, after all. If he was really confirmed to be dead, it would be a huge blow to the Frost Dragon tribe. He is really dead? Fox, who was sitting at the end, had his eyes lit up. The news that he wanted to hear the most was finally confirmed. However, he didn't expect it to be revealed by Alex in the end. However, all this wasn't important. Elizabeth had already left the Frost Dragon tribe, and she was the only candidate for the chief now. As long as she got the Frost token, she would be able to become the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe legitimately. Great Elder, where is the Frost token now? Fox tried to ask as calmly as possible. The Frost token is the token of the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. It should be retrieved as soon as possible. Douglas glanced at Fox and frowned slightly. The Frost token was handed over to Elizabeth by Alex. What? Fox stood up immediately and agitatedly said, "How can such a precious item fall into the hands of a traitor?" Elizabeth is a member of the Frost Dragon tribe and Rankster's daughter. How is she a traitor? Douglas' voice had a tinge of displeasure. Fox realized that he was a little too agitated. He quickly lowered his head and respectfully said, "Great Elder, Elizabeth colluded with Alex to break the rules of the duel. She even severely injured me and almost killed me before escaping from Frost Dragon Island. Is such behavior considered a traitor?" "Yes, Great Elder. This woman is as unruly and cruel as Ranks. If we keep her in the tribe, she will definitely cause a disaster. She might even raise another Ranksta. This time, she must have a grudge against the Frost Dragon tribe. Why don't we kill her as soon as possible while she's still young to get rid of future trouble?" Second Elder and Third Elder chimed in with a cruel look on their faces. The other elders had different expressions, but they didn't refute. Utter nonsense. Elizabeth is pure and kind, completely different from Rankst. If she wasn't forced into a corner by you, why would she fight back? You fellows must be afraid that our Frost Dragon tribe will not decline. That's why you're racking your brains to get rid of your outstanding juniors. I'm ashamed to be associated with you. The sixth elder slammed the table and shouted angrily. "What? Old Six, don't be foolish. If that lass Elizabeth really becomes the chief of our Frost Dragon tribe, our days will only be worse than when Rankster was around." The second elder said in a low voice with a displeased expression. Elder Lu looked at the elders mockingly. If not for Rankster, our Frost Dragon tribe would have long fallen out of the top 10 dragon tribes, let alone be on par with the Golden Dragon tribe. With him around, you won't be able to do as you please. However, to us Frost Dragons, this is a rare period of upward development in thousands of years. If Elizabeth can become the next Rankster, not only will I not object, but I will also support her with all my might. Enough. Douglas interrupted everyone's argument with a dark expression. His sharp gaze swept past all the elders and Fox, and he said in a low voice, "Elizabeth is the most talented member of our Frost Dragon tribe in the past few hundred years. Although the Frost token is a precious item of our tribe, it's also a relic of Rankst. It's unreasonable to ask for it back by force now." Great Elder. Fox's expression darkened as he tried to say something. "If you don't want to give up, you can go to Chaos City and ask for it yourself. Alex is in Chaos City. Why do you think he handed the Frost token to Elizabeth in such a high-profile manner?" Douglas looked at Fox coldly. Fox choked and swallowed his saliva subconsciously. The person he didn't want to see the most was Alex. How would he dare to go and ask for the Frost token? If we push her away again, the Golden Dragon tribe will take her away without hesitation. They might even be willing to let her sit on the Golden Throne. Douglas looked at everyone and said in a low voice, "By then, we won't have any confidence to stand on par with the Golden Dragon tribe. The sealed land isn't on the Golden Dragon Island, but under the Dragon Island?" Lewis couldn't help but exclaim as he looked at the notice he just received. After the incident at the Thunderstorm Mountains, he had a deep understanding of how scary the devil was. Moreover, there was a similar mural under the Golden Dragon Island, which made him take it very seriously. However, even after using the power of the entire clan and digging 3 feet into the ground, they still couldn't find anything related to the seal or the demon. Just as he thought this mural was left behind by the ancients as a warning, he didn't expect Alex to find a sealed land in the mountains under the Dragon Island. What made him even more uneasy was that this seal was already damaged, and the devil inside was nowhere to be found. Louis shuddered at the thought of that powerful octopus monster escaping from the seal and hiding somewhere. I have to go to that seal to investigate as soon as possible so that we can discuss how to deal with it. Louis paced around the hall with an anxious expression. Initially, I thought that the Thunderstorm Mountains incident had already been settled. Who would have thought that there would be another wave today? A demon that has escaped the seal is indeed a headache. André sat on the high seat and looked at the notice in his hand with his eyebrows tightly knitted. The faces of the officials below were also filled with worry. The Thunderstorm Mountains incident had already spread, and the officials already knew about how powerful the devil was. Now that a devil had escaped from the seal, it added some uncertainty to the peace conference 3 days later. Your Majesty, this devil was discovered by Alex and Irina. Could it be that the two of them deliberately released fake news in order to control the peace conference? An official questioned as he stood up. The officials also had some doubts when they heard that. It wasn't impossible. Michael invited all the powerhouses of the various races to investigate that sealed land together. We'll know if it's fake news once we investigate. Alex and Irina won't do such a foolish thing. André shook his head and said in a low voice, discuss the countermeasures. If that devil really escaped from the seal, how should the Roth Empire deal with it? Ding! The bell outside the door rang again. Amy, who had just come down from upstairs, skipped to the door with an ice cream in her hand. Teacher Luna and Irina were chatting outside the door. Chapter 1891. In the kitchen, Meg's eyelids twitched as he watched Irina and Luna, who were talking and laughing as they walked in. However, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Luna was smiling without any embarrassment or awkwardness. Seems like I've really gauged the heart of a gentleman with my own yardstick. Meg complained about himself in his heart, and his heart calmed down a little. A stable harem could indeed calm a man's heart. When all the guests arrived, the children also came downstairs. Everyone raised their glasses to celebrate Amy's victory in the Magic Caster tournament, and the dinner began in a relaxed and happy atmosphere. Amy's achievement was too shocking, but it didn't create much pressure for the other children. After all, it was too unrealistic, and it lost the effect of educating them. Meanwhile, Amy didn't care about this achievement that others thought was invincible at all, and didn't change the way she interacted with her friends. The delicious food made the atmosphere of the gathering more cheerful and pleasant, and the children were so busy that they couldn't stop eating. Amy, did you bring back that golden trophy? Jessica asked as she pointed at the championship trophy placed on the shelf behind the counter in a conspicuous position. Yes, I bit into it. It's really made of gold. Amy nodded her little head and smiled, revealing her neat teeth. Wow, the children's eyes lit up. Although they didn't know how precious this trophy was, since it was made of gold, it could definitely be exchanged for a lot of delicious food. I heard that Little Boss is the youngest magic caster in the history of the Magic Caster tournament. She's even more amazing than Princess Irina back then. She's the light of our Chaos City, George said in awe. Miranda pinched his leg with her hand under the table and gave him a look. George, who was wondering why he was pinched, saw Irina, who was looking at him diagonally with a half-smile, and immediately realized that he had said something wrong. His expression became a little awkward. Yeah, little Amy is indeed very capable. She's much more capable than I was back then. Irina smiled and nodded. She wasn't angry at all. After all, it was her daughter who was being praised. Your Highness, I didn't mean that. George rubbed his belly awkwardly. After all, she was the princess of the elven race. No matter how stubborn he was, he wouldn't dare to criticize her. Fortunately, she didn't mind, so he heaved a sigh of relief. Teacher Luna, I heard that you are setting up a foundation recently, right? Irina looked at Luna, who was sitting beside her, and asked softly. Luna nodded and said, yes, it's mainly a foundation for children's education and life support. Irina smiled and said, that's good. I would like to show my sincerity and donate 10 million copper coins. Is that okay? If Miss Irina is willing to contribute some love to the children, then I would be very grateful. Luna hurriedly stood up and bowed to Irina. You're welcome. This is just a small token of my sincerity. You're the one who is truly working hard for the children. Irina stood up and supported Luna with a sincere expression. I'm only doing my part. There are still many things that I can't do well, Luna said in an embarrassed manner. How could that be? Teacher Luna is the kindest teacher in the world. She's a super good teacher. Amy looked up at Luna with a serious expression. Teacher Luna is the best. Jessica nodded in agreement. Little ones. Luna looked at the two children, and a smile appeared on her face. The two little ones had once lived on the streets in precarious conditions. Now that they were living happy lives, she was quite gratified. Meg raised his wine glass and took a sip of red wine as he looked at Irina with appreciation. This woman was like a glass of mellow red wine. The more one tasted it, the more one would discover her beauty. She was so captivating that one couldn't extricate themselves from it. After the table of dishes was almost finished, the children went to play again, and the adults chatted idly. Mr. Meg, I have something to discuss with you. Are you free now? Luna walked over to Meg, who was brewing tea, and said with a smile. Please wait a moment, Teacher Luna. I'll bring the tea over to them, and we can talk later. Meg served the tea to the chatting people, and then came back with the tray. He brewed 2 more cups of tea, and gestured for Luna to sit at a table nearby. What's the matter? It's about the foundation. The new teaching building in Chaos School has been completed, and the internal facilities are almost ready. We can recruit 500 more students next semester, and the recruitment of teachers has also begun. We've already compiled a list of over 3,000 children of the right age to enroll in school, but they're limited by their family conditions. We've given them financial support, but there are still many children who can't enroll in school in time. I'd like to hear your opinion. Luna looked at Meg with a worried expression. Meg also frowned slightly upon hearing that. The foundation had received a lot of donations, but it was limited by Chaos School's teaching ability at the moment. It wasn't that Chaos School wasn't doing anything. Chaos School was a comprehensive school with students from all races. The teaching content ranged from basic language and writing to combat teaching that suited the characteristics of each race. It was inclusive and had high requirements for the teachers. It was already doing its best to enroll 500 more people in a short period of time. However, that meant that there were still over 2,000 children of the right age who couldn't enroll in school. Time waited for no one. Perhaps some of the children would be old enough to make a living by themselves next year. If they missed it, it would be a lifetime. After thinking for a while, Meg looked at Luna and said, Why don't we build a new school? A new school? Luna looked at Meg with surprise. Since Chaos School can't enroll on a large scale in a short period of time, why don't we use the Foundation's funds to build a new school so that those children can enroll in school? Meg nodded and continued, This new school will be different from Chaos School. We will only teach the basic cultural subjects, which are arithmetic, the common language, writing, and some basic general knowledge. We won't teach classes like combat and magic. I see. Luna pursed her lips as she considered the feasibility of Meg's suggestion. Meg waited for a while before saying, I think for these children, magic and combat might be very far away. Their goal in the past was to survive. If we can teach them some practical knowledge and let them step up from the bottom, it might be able to change their future. Luna's eyes gradually lit up. She looked at Meg and nodded as she said, I agree with you. Even for the students of Chaos School, most of them can't master advanced magic and combat skills. Basic knowledge is the most important thing for them. If we can let those children learn basic knowledge, it will definitely be a good thing for them. Chapter 1892. Luna looked at Meg with admiration. Mr. Meg was always able to find the core of the problem and come up with some brilliant suggestions. Luna hesitated and said, However, it's not easy to build a new school. We might be able to build a school campus, but where can we find suitable teachers? The problem of teachers is actually easy to solve. Our aim is to let the children go to school first, and we won't consider professional skills and practical teaching for now. We can try to rehire the retired teachers of Chaos School. Then, we can publicly recruit a batch of outstanding young talents. With the expansion of the Chaos School's teaching team, there should be many reserve teachers during this period, so we have a lot of choices. With the old teachers leading the new teachers, we can quickly form a new teaching team, and we will be able to satisfy the problem of children going to school, Meg said. Luna's eyes lit up even brighter. She nodded and said, there are indeed many retired teachers in Chaos School. If they are willing to rehire and impart their rich teaching experience to the new teachers, they will definitely be able to get on the right track quickly. However, building a new school is not a small matter. Chaos School is the only school in Chaos City for so many years. I wonder if the City Lord's castle will approve it. Meg looked at Luna with a smile. Leave the construction of the new school and the communication with the City Lord's castle to me, but the rehiring of the old teachers and the recruitment of the new teachers will be left to you, Teacher Luna. There are still about 20 days before the start of the next semester. If we hurry up, we might be able to let the children start school in the new year. All right. I will go to the school administration office to sort out the list of the retired teachers after I go back tonight, and then visit them one by one. Luna nodded. She was very motivated. It would be great if all the children could go to school. Irina walked over with a smile and said, if you only need teachers to teach the basic classes, there are also some librarians and noble private teachers among the night elves. They might be able to help. That's great. Luna's eyes lit up. The elves' long lifespan and learning ability far exceeded that of other races, so they had amazing knowledge. Librarians and private teachers were the best among them. She bowed slightly to Irina and said gratefully, thank you so much. You're welcome. What you've done is admirable, Irina said sincerely as she looked at Luna. Teacher Luna, if you want to establish a new school, can Amy also invest? Amy suddenly came up and looked at Luna expectantly. Little Amy, are you going to invest your pocket money? Luna looked at Amy with a smile. She did not expect the little rascal to know the word investment. But we're not doing business here. We're just trying to let more children go to school, so don't invest. Teacher Luna, actually, I have another suggestion. If we want to run this new school in the long run, I think we should turn it into a business. Anything that relies on love will not last long. We should pay the outstanding old teachers who are rehired a higher salary. We should also let the new teachers get the same treatment as the teachers in Chaos School. We can't let the children suffer, and we can't disappoint the teachers. Other than respect, we should also give them a salary that can support their dignity. Only in this way can we recruit even more outstanding teachers and let the children get a better education. And all these require a lot of funds. If we only rely on the Foundation's blood transfusion, it won't be a long-term solution. We need to make it have its own blood-producing function. In the initial stage, our goal is to let those children from poor families go to school. But if our school is good enough, I believe the residents of Chaos City will be willing to send their children to our school. And we can charge a suitable tuition fee to fund the school's operation. We're doing public welfare, but we should treat it as a business and a career right from the start. That way, even if the Foundation can't raise funds one day, the school can still survive on its own, Meg said to Luna seriously. Luna pondered seriously for a while after hearing that. Her eyes gradually lit up as she looked at Meg. Then, how should we do it? Meg thought for a while and said, we'll use the Foundation's current funds as the initial capital. We'll accept some external investment, but we have to have the absolute control of the school in the hands of the Foundation. With the Foundation's current scale and what we're going to do next, you'll also need to hire a team of accountants to share your work in accounting and do it more professionally and transparently. Luna nodded. She took out a small notebook from her bag and wrote down what Meg said. Irina looked at Meg with a little surprise. She didn't expect him to have such professional views in this aspect. Apart from his culinary skills, there was another side that she was curious about. So, can I invest now? Amy blinked. Her father had said that investing was something that could make money grow. She liked money babies. Then, how much are you going to invest, little Amy? I'll write it down for you in my notebook, Luna said with a smile. She was very pleased with Amy's enthusiasm. Amy thought for a while and said, 100 million. Is that enough? Luna was stunned. The noisy restaurant gradually quieted down. Everyone was looking at Amy in shock. Is it too little? Amy looked at the strange expressions on everyone's faces and thought seriously for a while. Then I'll add another 100 million. Little Amy, 100 million is a lot of money. Luna smiled helplessly. The little girl must have gotten the amount wrong. Yes, I know there are a lot of zeros. Amy nodded. But I really do have them. If you don't believe me, you can ask my father. Luna and everyone looked at Meg. Amy won a large sum of money in this competition. If she wants to invest 100 million copper coins to build a new school, I'm in favor of it. Meg nodded with a smile. So you're saying that little boss has already earned her first 100 million when she was 4 years old? George gulped. He was in disbelief. So, little Amy has quietly become the richest little rich lady among us, Yabamiya exclaimed. Luna also couldn't hide her surprise. A few months ago, Amy didn't have enough to eat, but now she wanted to invest 100 million copper coins in a new school in her name. Chapter 1893. The investment of 100 million copper coins was settled in a blink of an eye. Little boss Amy already had the aura of a big boss. Meg agreed to let Amy invest 100 million copper coins, but it was basically a public welfare investment. In the early stage, it was basically burning money to support poor children to go to school, but it was still unknown whether they could rely on their excellent teaching results to get others to pay to send their children to school. However, he stopped her from spending the second 100 million. Children still didn't know how much 100 million copper coins were. She might consider spending 1 copper coin. After all, she knew that it was enough to buy a biscuit. 100 million copper coins came out of her mouth without any hesitation. Even when he was a rich second-generation heir, he wasn't so generous. Opening a school was, of course, a big deal. However, as long as the money and people were in place, it wouldn't be difficult. Moreover, their goal wasn't to open a high-class school. Their main goal was to enroll all the school-age children and provide them with basic education, which was similar to literacy classes or kindergartens. The construction of the teaching team, under the leadership of the experienced teachers and the attraction of high salaries, would definitely have a good speed and space for improvement. Many things could be done in 20 days. Meg and Luna finalized some matters regarding the opening of the new school on the spot, and drew up a timetable. How to build a new school in 20 days and enroll the children in school. Every step had to be completed very efficiently. The school needs tables, chairs, and other things like that. I know some friends who make furniture, and they can help to arrange it. They will definitely be able to get it to the school at the lowest price, George said. That's great. Luna was pleasantly surprised. She had spent a lot of time and effort to get a relatively low price for the various facilities in the new Chaos School campus. Meg looked at the timetable filled with all kinds of matters and said with a smile, "Time is a little tight, but we are a new school, so we don't have to limit ourselves completely to the starting time of Chaos School. It's not impossible to start a school a few days later. It would be best if the children could start school at the same time. I will work hard," Luna said seriously. Then what will the new school be called? Amy asked curiously. Name. Luna hesitated and looked at Meg. Meg also pondered seriously for a while before saying, "How about we call it Hope Academy?" Hope Academy. Luna softly repeated the name, and her eyes immediately lit up. I think this name is very good. Giving all children a future filled with hope. This name is indeed not bad. Irina also nodded and looked at Meg with admiration. The banquet ended in a joyous atmosphere. Because of Hope Academy's proposal, a seed of hope had been planted in everyone's hearts. They couldn't help but look forward to this new academy. Meg, Amy, and stood at the entrance of the restaurant to send off the customers. We'll work as usual tomorrow. Everyone, rest early. Father, I've invested in Teacher Luna's school. Can I be a teacher there? Amy asked expectantly as she looked at Meg, who was closing the door. If Meg is willing to teach magic to the children, I think it's possible. Meg nodded with a smile. Of course, most of the children may not be able to learn even if they want to. That's such a pity. Amy couldn't help but feel sorry for them. However, a smile soon appeared on her face. But in this case, they won't have to scavenge on the streets and look for food. They can even sit in a clean and bright classroom. That's great. Are you that happy? Yes, very happy. Amy nodded vigorously. Because I used to wander on the streets too. I'm very envious of those students who go to school with backpacks. I think they're the same. There won't be such children on the streets of Chaos City in the future. They can all go to Hope Academy. Meg patted Amy's head. It turned out that this little fellow hadn't forgotten the days back then, and could even think for the other children. 20 days. Are you sure it's enough time? Irina asked Meg as she walked down from the corner of the stairs. Leave professional things to the professionals. I'll go to the City Lord's castle tomorrow. I think the City Lord's castle will give us some preferential treatment in terms of policies. As for the construction team, I already have a few dwarven construction teams that I'm familiar with. Meg nodded. Irina shook her head slightly and said, leave the construction of the school building to the night elves. The dwarves' craftsmanship is too rough, and their aesthetics are too poor. If they build a batch of square teaching buildings, it will obliterate the children's nature. You just need to give me a rough blueprint. That's great. Meg said almost instantly. The dwarves were indeed crazy about construction, but in terms of aesthetics, they were really weak in front of the elves. A school was a more special building. It could let the children have a happy childhood and a comfortable study environment, so it was naturally the best. System, give me a blueprint of a school that can accommodate 10,000 students. It has to have a fresh style, and it's best if it can make students of all races feel at ease. The cost can't be too high. On the premise that the quality is guaranteed, save as much as possible. Wait. Host, this system hasn't agreed to your unreasonable request yet. Please stop your request. The system's voice sounded. This is for the children. Host, please face up to your identity. You're a candidate for the god of cookery, and not some kind savior. Your direction of effort should be to create more delicious food, teach more people how to cook, and gain more believers. Don't waste time and energy on other things. The system said seriously. Meg rolled his eyes, and suddenly his eyes lit up. He also said seriously, how is this not proper work? I intend to set up a chef major in this school. Isn't it great to train professional and systematic chefs? The system choked. In this way, not only can I gain a group of believers with a higher degree of professionalism, but I can also fundamentally change the way chefs in this world are passed down, making it possible for delicious food to circulate in this world. If the experiment is successful, I can also promote chef schools all over the world, so as to achieve a fission effect, so as to harvest believers on a large scale. Is this also not proper work? Meg continued. It sounds reasonable. The system was a little hesitant. The corners of Mag's mouth curled up, and he continued, hurry up and get me a blueprint of the school. This first chef school has to be built with 10 times more effort. Try to reflect the theme of hope as much as possible so that the children can feel the hope of their future life as soon as they step into this school. The fee, this is what you should do. Why should I charge you? But, then I won't do it. I'll just lie down. Anyway, I've earned enough money and strength. Host, please wait a moment. The system is drawing the blueprint. Chapter 1894. Meg was secretly delighted that he had saved a few more copper coins. It was much better than earning an extra 1,000,000 copper coins from other places. I'll give you the blueprint tomorrow morning, and I'll get it out tonight, Meg said to Irina. Okay. Irina nodded and glanced at Meg. You're quite fast. Fast? How can a man be fast? Meg raised his chin slightly. Efficiency is one of my principles. They had gone out to play today and had a big banquet with guests. The two little fellows and Irina were a little tired, so they went upstairs to wash up and go back to their rooms to rest. Meg also went back to his study. The system's blueprint was ready and gave Meg 3 renderings for him to choose from. It was not wrong to say that the system's products were all top-notch. The renderings of the 3 schools were all better than Meg expected. The lush campus, simple and generous design style, but it made people feel humanistic care and hope everywhere. Meg struggled for a long time among the three choices and chose a campus design that leaned toward the style of Jiangnan Gardens. There were mountains and rivers, and there were many exquisite and interesting designs hidden in the natural and unrestrained campus, so that the children could find more fun in the school. Meg asked the system to print out the blueprint of the design plan and said, "Leave the other two plans for me. We'll use them when we open a branch in the future." After the school design plan was confirmed, Meg was not in a hurry to go to bed. Instead, he sat at the desk and began to organize his role in the school and the specific schedule. He had a lot of trust in Luna's ability. There would be no problem in leaving the teachers and children to her. What he had to do was to go to the city lord's mansion to ask for a piece of land that was enough to be used for the school, get the support of the city lord's mansion for the new school, and coordinate with the night elves to complete the design and construction of the school. Looks like I'll have to go to the city lord's mansion after tomorrow's business hours. Meg put away the pen and paper and went to bed. However, before going to bed, he glanced at the believer panel and couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. The number of believers had already reached 7,438. One should know that there were only 3,000 believers yesterday. That meant that there were more than 4,000 people passionately learning the 4 dishes today just by playing the teaching video. Isn't this too strong? Even Meg could not help but sigh. He did not expect the people of this world to be so adaptable. They had already gotten used to video learning. This once again boosted his confidence. If the magic vision machine could be popularized, video teaching would be a good way to increase the number of followers. Ding! The host's believers have exceeded 5,000, and the system mission has been triggered. The host is requested to achieve the achievement of 10,000 believers in 3 days, and the host will be promoted to a head chef. Mission reward: Affinity +1. The system's voice suddenly sounded. Is this a title or a realm? Meg asked curiously. This realm is determined by the number of followers the host has. The more followers the host has, the stronger the host will be. You will become an undying deity as a chef. Then the next realm won't be cooking spirit, right? Meg raised his eyebrows. Has the host already read the product manual? The system's voice was obviously a little surprised. Next is Chef King? Chef King? Host, please do not spoil. TSK, there's really no creativity at all. Meg rolled his eyes and continued, other than the reward, what benefits can I get from the promotion of the realm? Since the realm is mentioned and I want to become a god by relying on the way of cooking, I can't just rely on your rewards to live, right? The path of cultivation is a mystery within a mystery. Becoming a god through incense is even more wondrous. Host, please experience it yourself in your cultivation. Only by becoming a master chef can you truly step onto the path of cooking and take the first step to becoming the god of cooking. Alright, you just don't know. Why are you talking so much? Meg couldn't be bothered to continue talking to the system. Instead, he began to observe the ancient painting that appeared in his mind. The painting looked very old and antique. There was a portrait in the middle of the painting. It was him wearing a chef's uniform and holding a kitchen knife in his hand. It was his fathead fish. There were also blades of grass beside his feet. They were like fresh and tender chives. Specks of golden light flew out from those blades of grass and landed on his body in the painting. The color of the painting became a little brighter, but there were no obvious changes at the moment. This is the incense? Meg stared at it for a long while, but he still couldn't feel any changes that those golden specks of light brought to his body. He could only give up for now. It's only 10,000 points. I should be able to reach it by tomorrow. However, the effect of this teaching is really good. Should I find a place to set up a special learning section after the gourmet conference? Meg thought to himself. However, he had stood his customers up for 2 days in a row. He could release the mapo tofu tomorrow to appease the public's anger. That night, many people on the Norland continent couldn't sleep. The representatives of the various powerhouses set off for Chaos City again. This time, it was to verify that there were really devils that had escaped from the seal. As the rulers of the various races strengthened their defenses, They began to frantically calculate how this might affect the upcoming peace conference. After witnessing the terrifying power of that octopus monster in the Thunderstorm Mountains, no one could ignore the devils anymore. The joint investigation was about to begin. The evaluation this time could have a huge impact on the outcome of the peace conference 3 days later. The City Lord's castle in Chaos City was also brightly lit. The Grey Temple had already joined forces with the City Lord's castle's garrison to strengthen the blockade and surveillance of the Thunderstorm Mountains. That was the most dangerous place now. Rodu Royal Palace. In the Great Hall, Andre looked at Sean, who was standing with his head lowered, and said, "Sean, you will represent the Empire to Chaos City this time to investigate the devils." "Yes, Your Majesty." Sean bowed. An old military official stepped out and bowed. "Your Majesty, the devils are very powerful. The first prince is of noble status. I don't think it's appropriate for him to take the risk." "I agree. Your Majesty, the Norland continent is in troubled times now, and the peace conference is coming soon. I'm afraid something might happen if the first prince goes." Soon, a few other officials stepped out. There were both civil and military officials, and they expressed their concerns about Sean going to Chaos City. Josh stood at the side with a calm expression. He didn't say a word. Sean also stood with his head lowered. He was just following orders. Andre frowned. He looked at the officials and coldly said, "It's just investigating a broken seal with other races. If you don't even have the guts to do this, you're useless." Sean bowed again and said, "Your Majesty, I'm willing to go." Chapter 1895. Last night, Luna had been looking through the information of retired teachers in the archives until the latter half of the night. Later, she was too sleepy and fell asleep on the table. Early this morning, she took the list of retired teachers and their contact information and prepared to visit those old teachers. Her first target was a teacher of common language who had just retired last year, Tasir, a humble and polite old gentleman. The carriage stopped outside an exquisite house. Luna got off the carriage and knocked on the door. After a while, an old lady opened the door and saw Luna standing outside. She was surprised and pleasantly surprised. "Luna, why are you here?" "Good morning, Mrs. Bylinda. I'm here to see Teacher Tasir," Luna said with a smile. She had been to Mr. Tasir's house before. "He's trimming his flowers and plants in the backyard. Come in first. 2 days ago, he mentioned you young teachers," Mrs. Bylinda said with a smile and welcomed Luna in. The wooden house was a bit old, but it didn't have the slightest smell of decay. Instead, it was classical and elegant. The ground was covered with a brown carpet, and the burning fireplace made the room very warm and comfortable. There were 2 sofas in the living room. The cushions were knitted by the skillful Mrs. Bylinda. The exquisite decorations in the room were almost all made and arranged by Teacher Tasir himself. "You sit for a while. I'll go call him," Mrs. Bylinda said to Luna and walked to the back door. After a while, a hale and hearty old man walked into the living room. He looked at Luna, who was standing in front of the fireplace and looking at the paintings on the wall. He smiled and said, "Luna, why are you free today to come and sit with me for a while?" Luna turned around and looked at the old man, who was well dressed even at home. She smiled and said, "I haven't seen Mr. Tasir and Mrs. Bylinda for a long time, so I specially came to see you today. Have a seat. I'll make you a cup of coffee. The kids just brought it over 2 days ago. It's good stuff." Tasir walked over to the bar counter and grabbed a handful of coffee beans to put into the grinder. He shook the joystick with his hand while looking at Luna. "I heard that you have been busy building a new school building for the children. How is it going?" "The new school building has been completed, and the interior decoration is almost complete. Now, we just have to wait for school to start, and we can send more than 500 poor children to school," Luna replied with a smile. "More than 500 children." Tasir stopped what he was doing and gave Luna a thumbs up with eyes full of admiration. "Luna, you have really done a great deed for those children. The younger generation will surpass us in time. The younger generation will surpass us in time. I only did what I could." It was those kind-hearted people who donated to the foundation that allowed these children to go to school. Back then, the principal also told me that he wanted to expand enrollment, but it hasn't been easy for our school all these years. Giving out 100 scholarships every year is already the limit. You have solved the problem of 500 children going to school in one go. You don't have to be humble at all, Tasir said with a smile as he continued to grind the coffee. Luna looked at Tasir and pursed her lips. Although 500 children can go to school when the next semester starts, there are still more than 3,000 children in Chaos City who can't go to school. You know, if they miss school, they will have no choice but to do the lowest and hardest jobs. They won't have any chance or ability to change their fate. Tasir slowly stopped what he was doing and let out a long sigh. He lamented, "In the past, I always felt sorry for you for giving everything to those children and living a poor life. Moreover, you couldn't change anything. Apart from eating a full meal, those children still couldn't escape their own fate. Now that you have allowed 500 children to go to Chaos School, you have at least given them a chance to change their fate. However, our ability is ultimately limited. The fate of those 3,000 children is not something we can easily change. I know you also feel sorry for those children, and I also know that you are right. So, I have never asked the people around me to do the same for me." Luna nodded. She looked at Tasir and continued, "We can't, but what if there are more people like you? Those old teachers who have decades of teaching experience and still have the stamina to teach." "You mean?" Tasir looked at Luna perplexedly. Luna resolutely said, "I want to build a new school for those children. A new school that is different from Chaos School. It will only take in those children who can't go to school because of poverty." Tasir's eyes lit up, but he quickly calmed down. He hesitated for a while before looking at Luna and saying, "Luna, I know your intentions are good, but building a new school is not a small matter. Whether it's the investment of funds, resources, or teachers to teach the 3,000 students, I'm afraid we won't be able to support it with just us old fellows." "I know what you said. In terms of funds, the foundation still has sufficient funds at the moment. As for the procedures of the new school and the construction of the school buildings, there will be professionals in charge. As for the teachers in the school, we will recruit a batch of new teachers as the main force, but we will also need to hire a batch of experienced old teachers like you to lead them." Luna roughly explained the plan that she had discussed with Meg the day before to Tasir. Tasir's eyes became brighter and brighter. After hearing Luna's words, he stood up excitedly and looked at Luna. "I didn't expect you to have such a detailed plan." Although running a school like this can't develop every child's nature and ability to the greatest extent, for those children, learning some practical knowledge can change their fate. At least, they will have more choices. I am willing to join this school and become a teacher again to give these children the last light and warmth. Mrs. Belinda came out of the kitchen with a pot of boiling water and smilingly said, "Although my memory is starting to deteriorate, if you don't mind, I can also teach mathematics for a few more years, or teach some young teachers how to teach." "Thank you so much." Luna got up and bowed with a smile. "Don't say that. We are just doing a small thing. Luna, you are the one who is putting in a lot of effort for these children." Tasir waved his hand and said, "Not just us. There are a few old fellows who are bored at home after retirement. I just want to find them for tea later. I will tell them about this matter, and they will definitely be willing to join." "Is it Mr. Jeremiah and the others?" Luna asked. "Yes, it is those old fellows." Tasir nodded. "Then can I go with you to meet them? I want to talk to them personally." Luna looked at Tasir with some expectation. "Of course." Chapter 1896. Did you really draw this drawing last night? Irina sat at the dining table and looked at the thick stack of drawings for a while. Then she looked up at Meg, who was sitting opposite her, and asked in disbelief, "It's the real deal?" Meg smiled and took a sip of soy milk. "Shameless, shameless, shameless?" A string of words flashed through Meg's mind, but he ignored them. "Wow, what a beautiful school. It's even prettier than Chaos School." Amy came over to take a look, and her eyes lit up. "Can I study in this school too?" It's not easy to move Teacher Crassus' magic laboratory. Meg can't go to this school for the time being. Meg shook his head. All right. Amy was a little disappointed, but she didn't insist. This school is pretty good. As long as the location is confirmed, I can get them to start building. Irina put down the drawings and looked at Meg. She felt that there were many mysterious things about him, and that made her even more curious. Meg nodded. After breakfast, I'll go to the city lord's castle and try to get a cost-effective plot of land. After breakfast, the ladies arrived one after another. Meg wrote a small blackboard and hung it outside the door. New product launched at noon today, Mapo Tofu. It was a very simple new announcement. Mapo Tofu? It sounds a little heavy? This tofu is really something. Did Mr. Mac hire a new employee named Mapo recently? I wanted to complain that Mr. Mac stood us up for the whole day, but I'll let it go for the sake of the new dish. The customers were discussing and looking forward to the new dish. The number of customers lining up today has increased again. Mr. Mac cured my illness of staying in bed for many years. You don't know how popular Mr. Mac is these days when he taught people to cook at the gourmet food conference. He's out of the industry. That's terrible. It'll be harder to line up in the future. It was still early, but there was already a long line in front of the restaurant. Many customers couldn't help but complain. After the fast-paced morning business, Meg rode his bicycle to the city lord's mansion. It was still Dicus who received him. After hearing Meg's intentions, Dicus looked at him in surprise. You mean you want to build a new academy? Meg nodded and said, That's right. Given Chaos City's current size, one Chaos School is no longer enough to satisfy the basic education requirements for all the children, especially those poor students of the right age. What Chaos School couldn't do, we want to build a new school to do it. Our goal is not to replace Chaos School. Instead, we want those children who have been missed out to be able to sit in the classroom and learn like their peers. Then they can change their fate through hard work. Dicus listened carefully and said, Please wait a moment. This matter needs to be decided by the city lord. I'll go see if the meeting is over. Meg didn't have to wait for long before Dicus hurried back. Mr. Meg, the city lord has about 10 minutes now. Please come with me. Meg walked into the city lord's office. Michael looked up from a pile of documents and asked Meg, How much land do you need? Which location? How much money do you need? Meg was slightly stunned. He didn't expect Michael to be so straightforward. Dicus was also a little surprised. He didn't expect the city lord to give him the land and money without asking any questions. We're planning to build a school, I know. Then go ahead. Is there anything that Mr. Mac can't do? Michael smiled and pointed to the map hanging on the wall. The gray areas are empty. You can choose a location. Since he was so straightforward, Meg naturally didn't have any reason to be reserved. He waved his hand, pointed at the map, and said, Then let's do it here. It's in the north of the city and slightly closer to the city center. It's convenient for the children to go to school. The area needs to be 1,000 acres. How much do you need? Michael asked again. Meg shook his head and said, I know that the city lord's castle doesn't have much money. The money will be taken care of by the foundation. We only need the city lord's castle to support us in terms of policy and execution. I like your straightforward personality. Michael nodded. He turned to look at Dicus, who was dumbfounded. Dicus, I'll leave this matter to you. Complete all the procedures as soon as possible and fully support Mr. Mac's work. Yes, City Lord. Dicus nodded. Although he wasn't used to this, he still nodded. Then I'll thank the City Lord on behalf of the children first. I won't disturb you any longer. Meg left the office. Dicus followed Meg out of the door. He looked at Meg outside the door and said, Mr. Meg, it will take some time to complete the procedures for the transfer of the land. The specific policy support will also need time to be discussed. Do you think it's okay if I give you the land documents tomorrow? I'll have to trouble you then. Meg nodded and left with his bicycle. The transfer of such a large area of land only took a day. It was enough to show the city lord's castle's sincerity. Meg naturally didn't have a reason to rush them. He rode his bicycle to the north of the city. The land he drew was located in the middle of the slums in the north of the city and the wealthy district in the city. It was on the same central axis as Chaos School, symmetrical from north to south. This was a piece of barren land. Some parts of it were used for farming, but most of it was overgrown with weeds. It belonged to the city lord's castle, so there wasn't a problem of expropriation. Building a 1,000-acre college park on a piece of barren land in 20 days. I think it's doable. Meg looked at this piece of barren land and seemed to see a brand new school standing on it. The sound of reading and the laughter of children accompanied by the sound of reading. Meg went to the textile factory and told Irina, who was seriously patrolling the factory, that the land had been confirmed. They also had a detailed discussion about the construction work contracted by the night elves. What about the materials? Countless materials are needed to build such a huge school. Do you have any channels to get them? Meg asked the question that he was most worried about. Meg wasn't worried about the craftsmanship and aesthetics at all, but the materials were an issue that couldn't be avoided. I've seen your blueprint. Most of the buildings above the ground are made of wood. Since you've already confirmed the location, I'll bring them to plant the trees and plant the materials first. I'll need you to settle the materials for the ground. I don't like to do business with dwarves and goblins. They always think that we elves are stupid and have too much money, Irina said casually. I can buy the stone materials, but are you serious about planting the wood today? Meg looked at Irina and was a little confused. Chapter 1897. Do you know what the elven race has the most? Irina asked as she looked at Meg. Elves? Plant and nature magic casters. Irina smiled and said, just give us a piece of land and a handful of seeds, and we'll be able to turn it into a forest in a day. Meg blinked, and he suddenly realized that his thinking was still a little too narrow. After returning to the restaurant from the northern part of the city, Meg began to prepare for the lunch service again. The mapo tofu was destined to be the star of the show. It was a legendary dish, and it was a classic Sichuan dish that was often seen on tables in the Kingdom of Heavenly Province. Boss, what's the relationship between mapo tofu and tofu pudding? Yabamiya looked at Meg, who was grinding tofu, and asked with a curious expression. Meg thought for a moment before replying, it's probably the relationship between a young woman and an old woman's. Then isn't the mapo tofu a little inferior? No, they both have their own tastes and pleasures. Meg shook his head with a smile. This little girl was still too young. One had to know that mature women could have their own special section. In the restaurant, everyone was busy preparing, and the line at the entrance of the restaurant was also getting longer and longer. Within the line, there was a father and daughter pair that attracted a lot of attention. They were a bald man with tattoos and a skinny little girl. The little girl was very thin, and even though she was wearing a cotton shirt and pants, one could still tell that she was extremely frail. Her hands extended from her sleeves, and her face was very pale with sunken cheeks. Her forehead was slightly protruding due to the lack of flesh on her face, and she wore a very impatient expression. I want to go home. Georgina's brows furrowed with impatience, and her voice was weak and shrill. Georgina, it's my father's birthday today, so why don't you have a meal with me? I heard that this restaurant is very good. Look, there are so many people lining up, Kenneth said with a gentle smile. His voice was very gentle, and it didn't match his bald and tattooed appearance at all. I don't want to eat. A look of disgust appeared on Georgina's face, and she turned to leave. However, Kenneth wrapped an arm around her little shoulder and continued with a smile, come in with me for a while, all right? You know, you haven't sat with father for a long time, even if it's just a casual chat. Georgina looked at the submissive Kenneth impatiently. She furrowed her brows for a while before she stopped trying to break free. However, she still said firmly, I'll say this first. I definitely won't eat anything. All right, as long as you sit with me inside. It's up to you whether you want to eat or not. The smile on Kenneth's face was like that of a child who had just received a piece of candy. There was a hint of sadness in his relief. He was also a respectable man. He owned two companies that did short-distance freight transport and a quarry outside the city. Many years ago, his first wife passed away due to illness, leaving behind only an underage daughter. All these years, he raised the child alone and gave her the best of everything. He wished he could give her the stars and the moon in the sky. He just wanted her to grow up happily. However, he did not expect that his precious daughter at home would meet a scumbag outside. In the end, her heart was broken, and she did not eat or drink. From a healthy and cute extroverted little girl, she turned into this skinny and shriveled person. His heart was bleeding. However, even if he broke 3 of that energetic lad's legs, it still could not make her love life again. Not being able to eat normally was Georgina's biggest problem. She hated all kinds of food, including the ones she used to like. As long as food was mentioned, she would become irritated and even have symptoms of vomiting. He had seen many doctors and mages and tried countless methods, but he could only watch her become thinner day by day. A few days ago, he heard from a friend that the food in this restaurant was very delicious. Hence, he specially brought Georgina here today, hoping that this restaurant could let her eat something. Georgina pulled her hat lower, almost covering her eyes. She hung her head like a skinny little chick, as if she wanted to isolate herself from everything around her. Everyone looked away, as if they did not want to disturb this sensitive girl. Mr. Mac's culinary skills are really superb. As long as you try his dishes, you definitely won't be able to resist. Harrison, who was standing beside them, took the initiative to strike up a conversation with Georgina. Georgina turned around instinctively and was slightly stunned when she saw the chubby but kind-looking Harrison. It was also Harrison's first time seeing Georgina's face. He was also stunned when he saw her skinny appearance. As if she saw Harrison's expression, Georgina immediately looked away, turned around, and lowered her head even more. Kenneth glared at Harrison and turned to the side to protect Georgina behind him. Harrison also realized that his previous behavior was rude to a girl. Thinking of those timid eyes and looking at her skinny appearance, he could not help but feel pity for her. Although the bald uncle looked majestic and intimidating, he still looked at Georgina apologetically and apologized, "I'm sorry, Mississippi. Please allow me to apologize for my rude behavior earlier. I hope you can forgive me." A hint of surprise appeared on Kenneth's face, and he sized up Harrison. Although this fella was a little plump, his appearance was not bad, and he was not an evil person. He hesitated for a moment, and still stepped aside to let him pass. Georgina's eyelashes, which were hidden under her hat, trembled. She did not expect Harrison to take the initiative to apologize to her. She could not help but feel a little surprised. Recently, almost everyone who saw her face would retreat and leave, but this chubby brother did not. "I'm a regular customer of Mamie's. I've almost witnessed how this restaurant went from having only one dish to being famous in Chaos City, and even on the Norland continent." Seeing that Georgina had no intention of rejecting him, Harrison smiled and asked, "Guess how much time I spent?" Georgina had not paid attention to any food-related news for the past 2 years, and had never heard of this restaurant. However, she knew that for a restaurant to be famous in the entire city, and even on the Norland continent, it would need many years of operation before its reputation could expand gradually. "You definitely won't be able to guess." "I only spent 5 months, Harrison answered himself. Harrison answered his own question with a smile, and said, "Mamie Restaurant used only 5 months to go from an unknown restaurant to the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. Furthermore, it became famous on the Norland continent because of the beautiful articles written by gourmets." 5 months? Georgina raised her head in shock and looked at Harrison in disbelief. Chapter 1898. Perhaps it was because she had not interacted with a stranger for too long. Or perhaps Harrison's topic was too provocative. Hence, Georgina only realized that she had initiated a conversation with a stranger after she blurted it out. Furthermore, it was a stranger whom she had just met. She blushed when she realized that, and shifted her gaze away from Harrison instinctively. However, her pride did not allow her to shrink back again. She had to at least hear Harrison's answer. Harrison thought Georgina would ignore him at first, but his eyes lit up when he heard her question. He nodded with a smile and said, "Yes. Mamie's has only been around for slightly more than 5 months since it opened. At first, there was only Yangzhou fried rice on the menu. However, this restaurant's Mr. Mack is a super chef. He would come out with a new dish almost every few days, and they were all delicacies that could subvert everyone's taste buds and knowledge. Through word of mouth, Mamie's reputation grew rapidly. You have to know that before this, there was no restaurant in Chaos City that required customers to line up at the restaurant's entrance to wait for a meal. Furthermore, it was so orderly, and the atmosphere was so harmonious." Georgina glanced at the long line behind her. There was no lack of customers who were dressed in luxurious clothes. Although the line was very long, there was no impatience on everyone's faces. They chatted occasionally, and the atmosphere was harmonious and friendly as if they were old friends who had known each other for a long time. Listening to their conversations carefully, most of them were related to food. Many of them were talking about this Mamie's, and some of them were talking about other delicacies. This wonderful atmosphere reminded her of herself, who used to drag her father to look for delicacies in the streets and alleys a few years ago. There was a glimmer of light in Kenneth's eyes, as if he had seen hope. Harrison looked at Georgina with a smile. When she looked away, he continued, "This is really a very strange restaurant, and it often brings you surprises. I believe you'll be able to find the delicacies you want to try here." "Sorry, I don't want to eat anything." Georgina rejected Harrison's suggestion coldly. She hid behind Kenneth again and lowered her head. Kenneth's expression froze. After a while, he nodded apologetically at Harrison and sighed in his heart. Harrison frowned slightly, not because he was unhappy with Georgina's behavior, but because he was worried about the girl's health. This young lady's physical condition was obviously not very good, but she refused to eat. Moreover, she was in a very resistant state. This was a very bad thing. "However, as long as I enter Mamie's, there shouldn't be a situation where I don't want to eat, right?" Harrison rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. Not long after, the door of the restaurant opened. Meg walked out with a smile and welcomed the guests in. "What a young boss." Georgina looked at Meg, who was standing at the door, with a bit of surprise. She was also stunned by the beautiful waitresses behind him. They were so beautiful and dignified. Their perfect figures and beautiful appearances made her feel ashamed of her inferiority. "Come on, let's go in too." Kenneth held Georgina's hand and led her forward. By the time Kenneth and the rest entered, the restaurant was almost full. Mag, who was about to go into the kitchen to start working, glanced at the lady who was wrapped up tightly in black clothes and a hat. Georgina, female, 19 years old, human, suffers from severe anorexia nervosa, severe malnutrition, severe depression, moderate body failure. Her information just happened to pop up from the omniscient door. This condition is a little serious. She has to be treated immediately. Meg frowned slightly. He had already turned into a doctor. He was already thinking about how to start the meal. This young lady's condition looked a little complicated, but after sorting it out a little, it should be anorexia nervosa caused by depression, which led to severe malnutrition. And the visual manifestation of malnutrition was the failure of the body. Depression was a very complicated condition. Meg did not dare to make any unprofessional judgment. However, the most important thing now was for her to start eating normally and replenish her nutrients to improve her condition. At least, she had to have a healthy body first. However, for someone with severe anorexia, being able to step into the restaurant was already a very praiseworthy act. It would not be easy for her to take the initiative to eat. He was very confident in his culinary skills, but not in her. "Mr. Mack, if someone doesn't want to eat anything, what should we order?" Harrison followed him in. He leaned forward and whispered in Meg's ear, "How about roast duck and pork belly?" Meg glanced at Harrison. Based on his understanding of Harrison, he definitely did not have a problem of not wanting to eat anything. As long as his stomach could hold it, he would eat anything. Therefore, this question was most likely not for himself. Meg used his eyes to signal to the father and daughter who had found the last table by the window. "Yes." Harrison nodded, but a somewhat embarrassed smile soon appeared on his face. Meg immediately understood. This guy most likely fell in love at first sight. However, Harrison was a pretty good person. Whether it was his character or his family background, he could withstand the test and hammering. Although he did not think that he could win the girl's heart, as the owner of the restaurant, it was obviously not appropriate for him to personally advise her on what to eat. It might even bring her some unwanted attention, which would be counterproductive. There was only one seat left at that table, and Harrison would definitely be sitting there. It would be best for him to guide her to order. However, what the hell were roast duck and pork belly? For someone who had not eaten for a long time, seeing these two oily dishes on the table would probably make her leave immediately. Definitely not roast duck and pork belly. Including spicy grilled fish and steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers, these are definitely not recommended for her, Meg said seriously. First, I recommend a savory tofu pudding to start the appetite, then a braised chicken and rice or a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. If she orders the braised chicken and rice, she can also order a plate of mapo tofu to go with the rice. This meal is simpler, but it must leave a deep impression on her. Thank you, Mr. Mack. Harrison nodded hurriedly. Fortunately, he had asked Mr. Mack. Otherwise, he would have stepped on a landmine. He turned and walked to the last seat left. Georgina sat next to Kenneth. Her eyes were hidden under the brim of her hat as she looked around curiously. This restaurant was not small, but it was much smaller than large restaurants like Dukas Restaurant. Moreover, there was only the main hall. There were no private rooms, and there was a rule that customers had to accept sharing tables. There was already a young lady sitting opposite Kenneth, and the seat opposite her was still empty. Then, a huge figure walked over, casting a shadow on the ground. Hello, there's only one seat left. Can I sit here? Chapter 1899. Georgina heard the familiar voice, and looked up at the smiling Harrison instinctively. Deep down, she was against sitting at the same table with a stranger, let alone a man sitting opposite her. That meant that she had to endure his gaze, and that made her feel uncomfortable. However, this restaurant had a rule that customers had to accept sharing tables, so she had no right to reject. Or maybe it was because this chubby young man didn't look so annoying, and the smile on his chubby face was warm and gentle. Georgina nodded after a moment of hesitation. Thank you. Harrison pulled out a chair and sat down with a smile. He nodded at Kenneth again. Kenneth looked at Harrison and nodded back. He felt a little conflicted. When Georgina was young, he was always worried that she would get hurt, so he didn't like her interacting with boys too early. However, after she closed herself off, he hoped that someone could help him open her heart. Even if it was just a few words, it would be good. At least she wouldn't be alone. He could feel this chubby young man's kindness. He couldn't reject him because he really didn't have the ability to help her walk out. Hello, I'm Harrison. May I know your name? Harrison sat down and asked Joanna as if they were close friends. Joanna looked at him. That burning gaze was as bright as a torch, and it made her blush a little. She looked away instinctively, and after a moment of silence, she softly said, Georgina? Georgina? Harrison repeated softly with a smile, and said, It's a very beautiful name. Georgina couldn't help but look up at him again. She had never heard anyone give her name such a gentle evaluation. Aren't you going to take a look at the menu? Amy's menu should be the most interesting menu in Chaos City. It's just like an exquisite piece of art. Harrison pushed the menu in his hand to Georgina with encouragement and anticipation. Georgina looked at Harrison, and then looked down at the menu in her hand. Ever since she was humiliated by that boy whom she used to see as Sunshine 2 years ago, she hated all food and everything related to food. She hated the restaurant, the kitchen, and the menu. However, she couldn't reject Harrison's gaze now, or perhaps this exquisite menu did have some kind of curious magic. She still reached out to take the menu. The soft cowhide felt very comfortable to the touch. The delicate leather was more high-end than all of her bags. The simple and elegant design made the menu look even more high-end. The restaurant's rules are on the back of the menu, Harrison reminded. Georgina flipped through the menu and saw rows of small words listing Amy's rules. It was about queuing, sharing tables, dining etiquette, and mutual respect for the waiters. It was detailed but not cumbersome. Although it was a rule, it was full of human feelings. It wasn't that the restaurant owner had made such a demand. These rules were listed together to create a comfortable dining environment for the customers. She finally understood why she felt that this restaurant was a little different when she entered. The perfect partition, the harmonious guests who shared a table, the restrained voices, and the scene of the waiters being ordered around made people feel comfortable and at ease. It is indeed an interesting restaurant. Georgina couldn't help but think in her heart. However, she was soon stunned. This feeling of interest had not appeared in her mind for a long time. What was even more unbelievable was that this was an evaluation of a restaurant. Before you order, take a look at the menu. Amy's menu is the most exquisite I've ever seen, Harrison continued to encourage her. Georgina opened the menu, and her eyes lit up. This menu wasn't the kind of menu that an ordinary restaurant would have, where the names of countless dishes would dazzle the eyes. This menu was divided into sections for the various dishes. There was a breakfast section, a stir-fry section, a barbecue section, a snack section. It made it easy for people to find food according to their preferences. What was even more unique was that every dish was accompanied by a picture. The pictures were brightly colored, as if the real food was printed on the menu. Even someone like Georgina, who was resistant to food, couldn't help but swallow when she saw the pictures of the brightly colored and mouth-watering food. This was a memory reaction from her body. It proved that these pictures had caused some primitive reactions in her body. It's good that you have a reaction. Harrison's eyes lit up when he saw the subtle reaction of Georgina swallowing her saliva. The tofu pudding is sold in limited quantities every day. It's the favorite food of the ladies. After eating it, you'll become more beautiful and youthful. Look, I've become much fairer after eating it once in a while, Harrison recommended at the right time. He even extended his fair and chubby hand as proof. Of course, becoming fairer and prettier was something that ladies would never resist in their hearts. Georgina glanced at Harrison's hand. It was indeed fairer than hers. It was chubby and looked quite cute. She had such chubby hands in the past, but why didn't she feel that she was cute back then? However, she was a little interested in the tofu pudding that Harrison mentioned. When she was queuing up earlier, she heard the most about tofu pudding. What kind of magical dish was it that could make them fight so fiercely? Soon, she found the tofu pudding in the snack section. There was a piece of white and tender tofu pudding in the porcelain bowl. The sweet tofu pudding with golden red syrup was poured on top, while the savory tofu pudding with all kinds of side dishes was sprinkled on top. It looked like an exquisite dessert and was very cute. If you don't like sweet things, you can order a savory tofu pudding. It's refreshing and delicious, and there's no added sugar. After eating it, you'll only become prettier, but you won't gain weight. It's simply a holy product for beauty, Harrison recommended with a smile. The lady sitting at the same table put down the mirror in her hand and said to Georgina with a smile, I can testify to that. I didn't sleep well last night, and I have to meet an important client in the afternoon. Hence, I specially came to Amy's for a tofu pudding at noon, and I immediately looked radiant. This is the magical charm of tofu pudding. Kenneth sat up straight and looked at Georgina expectantly. His hands under the table were already tightly clenched into fists. Georgina looked at the two of them, and then at the menu in front of her. She pursed her lips and thought for a while before reaching out to close the menu. She shook her head, lowered her eyes, and said, I don't want to eat anything. A very clear rejection. She lowered her head and sealed herself up like a rock. She hated food and she hated herself even more. However, she couldn't nod her head. The only thing she could control was rejection. Chapter 1900. The female employee looked at Georgina and was a little shocked. However, she still retracted her gaze politely, picked up the mirror, and didn't say anything else. Kenneth averted his gaze and tried his best to hide the disappointment in his eyes, even though it was an expected result. Harrison also didn't expect Georgina to reject his recommendation. However, when he saw her looking down with her eyelashes trembling like an injured kitten, he couldn't help but feel pity for her. "I think there must be times when you like to try new things, right?" Harrison asked Georgina with a smile. Georgina thought Harrison would continue to persuade her like the others, and give her a bunch of reasons to convince her. She had even thought of leaving the moment he opened his mouth, but she didn't expect him to neither persuade her nor reason with her. She looked up at him, and felt gentleness in his gaze. It wasn't as blinding as the sun, but more like a fire burning slowly. Perhaps it wasn't bright enough, but it was warm enough. She nodded after a slight hesitation. She was once at the age where she liked to try new things. Back then, no matter how busy her father was, there would always be a day that belonged to her. She would bring him to all the streets and alleys of Chaos City, and try all the things that she had never tried before. Some were good and some weren't, but as long as it was something new, she would always have endless curiosity and would want to try it. "I like it a lot too. No matter if it's an interesting thing, an interesting place, or an interesting food, as long as it's something that I haven't played with or eaten before, I would always want to try it." Harrison's smile became brighter as if he was very happy that there was a similarity between the two of them. Georgina answered softly. Although she didn't continue the conversation, she felt that she seemed to have become closer to him. "Let's not talk about anything else. Let's just talk about Amy's. Every time Mr. Mac launched a new product, I would order it without hesitation no matter what other people's comments and guesses are. What others say doesn't count. It has to be something that I've tried before. If I missed out on a delicious dish, wouldn't I suffer a great loss?" Harrison continued, not minding Georgina's silence. Georgina looked at Harrison, and the curiosity and intimacy in her eyes became more and more intense. Back then she was just like him. She always felt like she had suffered a great loss for missing out on a delicacy. She looked exactly like him. "Yesterday, Amy's closed for the day, so I went to the alleys in the northern part of the city to look for street food. I found that there were a few good snacks recently, but unfortunately, they weren't filling. Today is the opening of the restaurant, and Mr. Mac is going to release a new dish. What a pleasant surprise." Harrison smiled like a 300-pound fatty. He looked at Georgina and said, "Miss Georgina, why don't we make a bet?" Georgina's nervous mood had unknowingly relaxed a lot because of Harrison. Hearing Harrison's words, she couldn't help but feel curious. Harrison said, "The new dish that Mr. Mac introduced today is called Mapo Tofu. Let's make a bet and guess what kind of dish it is. The loser has to promise the winner one thing." "Mapo Tofu?" Georgina read the name of the dish softly. The name of the dish sounded very strange. What was the relationship between tofu and tofu pudding? What was Mapo? The person? Or an ingredient? A mess of thoughts flashed through her mind. Just the name of the dish was enough to make her curious. "Don't worry, I won't ask for too much. But if you want to ask for anything as long as it's within my ability, I'll do it," Harrison said with a smile. "I wonder if you're willing to play this game with me." Georgina looked at the smile on Harrison's face. Although the answer in her heart was no, for some reason she nodded her head. "Then I'll make a guess first. I think this dish must be spicy, and it's spicy. Maybe it's made with tofu pudding. It should be a good snack." Harrison raised his eyebrows and said eagerly. He then looked at Georgina. "Miss Georgina, what kind of dish do you think it will be?" Georgina opened her mouth. She suddenly realized that she seemed to have fallen into Harrison's gentle trap. He ate here every day, so he definitely knew this restaurant and the chef better than she did. This was her first time here, so she didn't know anything about this restaurant or the chef's style. It wasn't easy to make a guess based on the name of the dish. However, looking at Harrison, her competitive spirit, which had disappeared for a long time, was reignited in that instant. After a brief moment of thought, she opened the menu and quickly found the Mapo tofu in the stir-fry section. There were small white cubes on the white porcelain plate, and they were wrapped in a bright red broth. Bits of crispy meat were dotted on top of the broth, and a handful of tender green onions were sprinkled on top. It looked extremely enticing. Georgina stared at the picture for a while before looking up at Harrison and saying, "I think this will be a dish that will go well with rice. Looks like we have completely different ideas. I think this is a snack that's suitable to be eaten on its own, but you think this is a dish that goes well with rice. We'll definitely be able to determine the winner." Harrison nodded. Georgina appeared to be very confident. Based on her past experience, such a dish would definitely have a strong taste. It wasn't a very good choice to eat it on its own, but it would definitely go well with rice. "Excuse me, what would you like to order?" At that moment, Yabamiya happened to come to their table. The girl at the same table ordered a sweet tofu pudding and a yangzhou fried rice. "I'd like a sweet tofu pudding, 2 rujiamos, and a mapo tofu," Harrison said with a smile. Then he looked at Georgina. "Miss Georgina, I think you would also like to see who exactly won, right?" Georgina felt that something was wrong, but she just had to prove that she was right in front of Harrison. After hesitating for a while, she still looked at Yabamiya and said, "I'd like a mapo tofu and a bowl of rice." "Alright, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded with a smile. Kenneth looked at Georgina in surprise. This was the first time she took the initiative to order in the past 2 years. It even made him feel a little surreal. And all of this was thanks to the young man sitting opposite him. "Sir, what would you like to order?" Yabamiya asked Kenneth. Kenneth hesitated for a while. Thinking of what Harrison said earlier, he said, "I'd like a savory tofu pudding, a braised chicken and rice, and a fried eggplant with garlic sauce." Chapter 1901. After ordering, Georgina looked at Harrison, whose eyes and mouth were full of smiles, and felt that she had been tricked. She had been relying on the nutrient solution to sustain her life for the past 2 years. Her hunger had already disappeared, and she couldn't be interested in any food. She even felt nauseous. Yet, she had ordered a serving of mapo tofu for herself. After a moment of silence, she wanted to explain the situation. Harrison beat her to it, and seriously said, "Your eyes are very beautiful." Georgina was slightly taken aback before she blushed. His eyes were light purple. Since he was young, many people had praised his eyes. If there was anything on her that was worth praising, it seemed to be her eyes. It was just that most of the time, others couldn't see her eyes. In the past 2 years, apart from her father, he seemed to be the only one who had said that. "Thank you." Georgina smiled shyly. The curl of her lips felt a little unfamiliar, but she felt warmth in her heart for some reason. She smiled. A gratified smile also appeared on Kenneth's face. However, the way he looked at Harrison was a little more scrutinizing and complicated. This little fatty actually flirted with his daughter right in front of him, but he couldn't stop him. Harrison saw the smile that flashed across Georgina's face, and felt very encouraged. He continued to ask, "Miss Georgina, you must have grown up in Chaos City, right?" Georgina nodded. "Then you must know Cedar Alley. 10 years ago, that was the most complete food gathering place in Chaos City. Almost all the novel snacks originated from there, and they quickly spread to all the food stalls in the streets and alleys. However, you could only get the most authentic flavors there." "I know that place." Georgina's voice raised a few octaves unconsciously. Her family lived near Cedar Alley when she was young. That place was simply her childhood paradise. She would go to Cedar Alley to have some snacks after school every time. Now that she thought about it, it was actually more than 10 years ago. At that time, the person who came to pick her up from school was still her mother, the most gentle mother in the world, the mother who was willing to eat everything with her. Harrison sighed and said, "I went to Cedar Alley a few days ago. There aren't many food stalls left. I heard that many have opened up shops in the Aiden Square, and some have closed down. It's not easy to eat the same snacks as I remember." "Already gone?" Georgina couldn't hide her disappointment. In the past, she would go to Cedar Alley every once in a while, but she hadn't been there for the past 2 years. She didn't expect that it had completely declined. Harrison looked at Georgina with a smile. "Cedar Alley has come to an end, but the real classic and delicious snacks can stand the test of time. If you want to eat them, I can take you to the streets and alleys to look for them. We'll definitely find them. There was a glimmer of light in Georgina's eyes as she looked at Harrison. It was as if a crack had appeared in her closed heart, and a ray of light shone through. If you don't mind, I can come along. Kenneth couldn't help but cough softly to emphasize his presence. Georgina looked away with a blush on her face. She lowered her eyes slightly and didn't say anything else. If you're willing to come, Uncle, that's not a problem. Harrison wasn't embarrassed at all. However, it was indeed a little inappropriate to flirt with a girl in front of her father. However, Miss Georgina smiled and talked to him. She even ordered a serving of mapo tofu. At least it was a good start. Now, he was more worried about whether Mr. Mac's mapo tofu was good enough. After all, the savory tofu pudding had already been rejected. Whether the first bite of mapo tofu could capture her heart and make her unable to put down her chopsticks was the most important thing. The short silence was broken by the dishes that were served on the table. Here are your dishes. Please enjoy. Yabamiya placed the dishes on the table one by one, and then left with a smile. Meanwhile, Georgina's gaze was already attracted by the spicy mapo tofu in front of her. On a white porcelain plate, small pieces of tofu were wrapped in a bright red broth. It was red and white with golden meat stuffing sprinkled on top. Then, a handful of green onions were sprinkled on top. The bright color made one full of appetite. I don't want to eat it. I just want to prove that I'm right. That's all. Georgina kept telling herself in her heart. However, that spicy and fresh aroma drifted over along with the hot steam, continuously tempting her. Her long-suppressed appetite was like a spring bamboo that was ready to move. Under the impact of this aroma, it actually showed signs of loosening. Her psychological resistance to food was actually so weak and unstable in the face of his attack. The color is quite vibrant, and the spiciness is already wafting over. Compared to the tofu pudding, the shape of this tofu is more firm, but this flavor. Harrison looked at Georgina with a smile, and said, Miss Georgina, why don't we taste it together? Let's see who guessed correctly. I'm only going to try one bite, Georgina said with a serious expression. Then she picked up a spoon and scooped up a spoonful of mapo tofu. The small cubes of tofu had sharp edges and corners, and they were wrapped in a thick golden red sauce. The golden meat stuffing and green onions were embellished on top of the tofu pudding, creating an extremely enticing sight to behold. Georgina gulped, and a hint of anticipation welled up in her heart. This was a very peculiar feeling. The last time she had felt anticipation for food, and even a little impatience, was around 2 years ago. During the past 2 years, there had been almost no food that could pique her interest. Perhaps it was because the aroma of this mapo tofu was simply too enticing. Or perhaps it was because the person sitting across from her had warmed her heart and stomach, making her feel that there were still some beautiful things in this world. Georgina blew on the tofu pudding, and when she felt that it was about to cool down, she placed it into her mouth. Hot! As soon as the tofu entered her mouth, Georgina's first reaction was that it was scalding. Perhaps the surface of the tofu had cooled down a little, but the inside of the tofu still maintained its freshly baked temperature, which made her shudder. She resisted the urge to spit out the tofu in her mouth, and opened her mouth slightly to take a few breaths so that the temperature would drop slightly. At this moment, the taste of the mapo tofu truly began to appear. The tender tofu melted in her mouth, and the meat stuffing melted in her mouth. Numbness, spiciness, freshness, fragrance, and crispness instantly burst forth in her mouth, making her taste buds that had just been stimulated by the hot tofu pudding completely fall for it. Her sluggish taste buds had not tasted anything for a long time, and she was completely caught off guard, so she was subjected to the most violent impact. Furthermore, it was one round after another, and there was no way for her to stop. Georgina, who was squinting her eyes slightly, could not help but let out a soft moan. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.